Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, I believe, the fourth roundtable, not of this year, but third roundtable of this year, fourth roundtable since coming back to YouTube. I am joined this evening by Morgoth, Nick Dixon, and Millennial Woes for this discussion on Restore Britain, which has come onto the news this week with kind of a bang. A lot of traction going around, a lot of people saying, I want to be a part of this, or I'm not at all for this. A lot of reform defectors, a lot of reform apologists. So I just welcome everyone in turn. Welcome, Nick Dixon.
Hello, you and me are the mugs with actual names here, Mark, so we've got to be really careful.
I used to go by my moniker by this YouTube channel, not so obvious, but that is what that is. But having self-doxed, it's incredibly freeing. I only got one Hope Not Hate hit piece written about me. So
same, snap. Go. But you know, they're looking worse and worse, aren't they, those Hope Not Haters? It's becoming more and more. It was always a badge of honor, but it's become even more of a badge of honor.
Long may they recede into the dust from whence they came. And speaking of, someone else who's been classified by Hope Not Hate, I believe Morgoth's review is here.
Hello, thanks for having us on again.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the next based film review, classic film review that's coming out, of course. And we're also joined by Millennial Woes, who's been on the channel once before to talk about remigration. Welcome, Millennial Woes.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm sure this will be quite fun. There's a lot to talk about.
Indeed. And last time we got accused, last time I had Academic Agent and Millennial Woes on to talk about remigration. I've also had Morgoth on twice to talk about the UK murder rate, which is very interesting. And also, what was the last thing we talked about, Morgoth? It was, goodness me, it's escaped me now, but that was also deadly interesting. So we were accused of having a little bit of a ramble, so I have put together a wonderful little agenda with the appropriate colors for the topic that we're talking about. And this is about this. So for everyone who I assume know, Restore Britain is the former movement turned political party run by Rupert Lowe MP, who is the most, I suppose, I don't want to use the word based because I kind of feel like based is a bit of a cringe term now, but he's our guy. He's a sensible, the only sensible MP as far as I can tell in terms of things. So you might guess that I'm somewhat well disposed towards Restore Britain, although we'll get into the nuances of what they've discussed already. And yeah, the first comment that gets levied a lot is that Restore Britain is purely an online phenomenon because Elon Musk retweeted Rupert's launch video. I believe it gained like 15 million additional views on that, but it was already doing well and got up to about 35 million views on X. He's also gained around 200,000 additional followers on Facebook. So he's gone from something in the region of 600,000 Facebook followers to 700,000 Facebook followers to around 900,000. And on X, I think he's gone from 550,000 to about 700,000. So he's definitely the MP with the most traction. But does that traction translate on the ground? I'll open the floor. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I'll go first. If you want. I don't think like this idea whether something's purely online and it's not having any effect or any impact in the real world, I think it's a bit out of date. The problem with culture these days is that there's no offline. We're just everybody's permanently online. And like say the X thing, I looked this up this week. Between 19 and 23 million people in the United Kingdom have got a Twitter account. I couldn't. But we tend to look at it as if there's maybe say 5,000 to 10,000 sort of activists or something, or in our scene, or maybe you've got 2 or 3 million in total, because people will say, well, it's the intelligentsia, it's the political class, the media class. That's who uses Twitter. In actual fact, like a third of the population or less these days, I suppose, has got a Twitter account. And just to answer the question, I did a few tests of this by asking what my normie circle, my normie weather vanes in my family, and they all heard of Rupert Lowe. And my dad's response was basically that it's just another way to split the right-wing vote. So he had heard of him, but it was a bit negative. It was a bit kind of, we don't need another right. We will come on to that because it's in the list. So, I mean, you've been hearing this a lot as well, where either nobody's heard of Rupert Lowe or they have, but he's going to split the right-wing vote, which is another thing people have came up with. But my answer to number one would be, I don't think there's this kind of purely online, offline thing anymore. I don't think it's a hard distinction. I think it's all merged together.
I think there's definitely a case for that. I would say I've had similar encounters in normie world. My father has carers, and one of them came in today talking about how Farage was done. He was washed because of Rupert Lowe, which was quite entertaining. But I'm curious what our other guests have encountered in their sort of day-to-day sort of since this began. Is it something that's on people's lips or nothing at all?
Well, my mum had heard of him, as I tweeted the other day. I said, my mum's asking me about Rupert Lowe. Literally 100% of people have heard of Rupert Lowe. And this was my claim, just to counter the idea that no one's heard of him. I mean, Morgoth's absolutely right. How can he, and I think it was Jess Gill, to her credit, that said, how can he be splitting the vote and no one's heard of him? So those two can't coexist. And then we saw the Navarra documentary where a bloke on the street just said he was voting for Rupert Lowe. I think people have heard of him. But if you want me to answer this first question of is it purely online, I think a few things. One is the idea of the people who don't vote. Rupert's saying that people who have stopped voting are considering restore. And if you look at this little graph, is it coming up, or have I messed that up? Oh, it's not there on the screen. Oh well, I'm trying to do.
I will put it up. Don't worry.
I'm used to being the host. Sorry, I'm just totally taking over. So this is who would Britons prefer to have as prime minister? And you see that none of them still gets the most by quite a distance. Farage is winning this, and then none of them, he's on 21, none of them is on 37. And it's quite interesting to look at the other ones where the Greens actually, they want Polanski, but they're so radical, even he's not enough for them. And actually most of them want none of them. And the others, obviously the Farage cult wants Farage, and the other parties tend to want their own guys. But and that was that. So the whole point of that is, if you can get the none of the above, of course, that's massive, and that's not purely online, right? And so that's one thing. The other thing is some of the accounts might be overseas, in which case they might be inspiring people, but obviously they can't vote. Some young people might not vote, or either be too young or just not bother. The other thing I'd just say is there are sort of 2 or potentially 3 Restore Britons. This is just me thinking about it today, just spitballing, as they say. But I was thinking that Rupert is very much not online. He's totally analog. He's a bloke who's been in business, run Southampton Football Club, been successful, now has a farm. He's in his barber jacket on the farm. More importantly, he's in Parliament. He's got in there. He's also holding civil servants to account in these little meetings constantly. So he's incredibly non-online and incredibly real. But then you've got the younger lot, and you've got the lads like Charlie and Harrison and Lewis, and they represent something a bit different because they're not going to have a farm anytime soon because they're Zoomers, or I think Lewis is an honorary Zoomer, so they've got different concerns. And then it's how these two work together. And then arguably you've got a third Restore, which is the more, let's say, robust posters who are posting on X in favor of them. And they're the ones that, of course, are going to be used against Rupert. I believe the Times, even as we speak, is working on a hit piece based on the idea that, it's all racist nutters in Restore. So that's going to be a thing as well. But certainly Rupert is an incredibly analog figure. And then it's like, how can you bring in the younger generation? I can see younger people getting into Restore, naturally, inherently conservative younger people. If they want to tear everything down, they go green. But if they want to go back to the old Britain, people like Charlie, then they will get involved. So I don't believe it's going to be purely online, though obviously he does do well online and he's boosted by Musk, etc.
I am curious.
Well,
sorry, Colin, come in.
All right, I would just chime in on this issue. If there's something you want to say first, then you should go for it.
I was just going to say the analog online split is interesting because he's obviously gathered at the moment the sort of the base sprogs, the trifecta if you will, together, as you mentioned, Nick. But I really think it's going to be about whether it translates well into an analog world is how well he responds to the current tastelessness, I suppose, of the mainstream approach, because obviously analog people tend to consume less online material, even if they are, as Morgoth says, a third of people on X, a third of UK adults are on X, supposedly. Which is to say that if he's able to be agile, for instance, this attack on him where he was called a neo-Nazi by I can't remember
Layla
her
Cunningham.
name. Yeah, Layla Cunningham. And the fact that he's already like, we're crafting a legal defense and we're just going to ram it down their throat, right? And make everyone else scared to call us nasty names, essentially. We don't care, but it's defamation and we're going to, we're libelous. So we're going to deal with that. And I think the more that happens, the more they're able to translate the attacks of their enemies, so to speak, into good publicity, essentially, or more press, which will amplify it. That's all I want to say. So yeah, Millennial Woes.
Here's my perspective on this is that I should say I've been ill, so if my voice is a bit weird, that's why. I should have said that at the start. This idea that it's a purely online phenomenon, I think you should always trust your enemy's judgment. And right now it's very clear that everyone is scared. Everyone is worried. From The Guardian to The Telegraph, the mainstream media is attacking Restore Britain. Hope Not Hate have put out a hit piece. Spiked Online, I find absolutely disgusting. They've put out a hit piece. And of course, you've had death wishes posted on Twitter as well. So they wouldn't be doing all of this. None of this would be happening if it were a purely online phenomenon, and if they believed that it was a purely online phenomenon, and that if they believed that it was going to remain a purely online phenomenon. They just wouldn't be doing any. They wouldn't be taking it seriously, but they are taking it very seriously. And I think that's all the evidence. I mean, you should trust their judgment. They know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. And when they say, "Oh, it's just a pure," that's nonsense. That's it's a cover story, which is belied by the fact that they're taking it seriously. And then further to that, I would say whether the extent to which it enters the real world, and as Morgoth said, I'm not sure that there is much of a division anymore in that sense. But anyway, the extent to which it goes on to the streets and campaigning and so on is really down to Restore Britain now. That's their choice. They can choose to stay campaigning online and very Zoomer, millennial aimed stuff, or they can choose to do more traditional campaigning. What I would hope is that they don't go down the reform route of having bingo nights and stuff, because that's a whole other matter. But I think that's just crazy and so tactless. But yeah, that's what I would say. I don't think it's a purely online phenomenon, and I definitely don't think it's going to remain or be that in the future. I think it's nonsense.
Yeah, I think one of the great advantages that he's to his rhetoric at the moment, aside from the fact that he's not a particularly, I mean, you can see from his whole aesthetic, he's kind of co-opted for, you remember Farage did that campaign video where he was walking in the fields or along the cliff with his dog or whatever in country gear. And Lowe has just done that, but better, if that makes sense. He's sort of stolen or taken the brand, but he's very he's going for this rugged aesthetic. And I think that's doing him a lot, because doing a lot of work, because obviously Reform Conference has been mocked. I mean, certainly by us and our sort of sphere, by the amount of bombast, balloons and the conference theatre and confetti cannons and stuff like that. And I think Lowe looks on that with a lot of disdain, just from his rhetoric around it, of just what a waste of money. We're here to get stuff done, and it's going to be painful sort of rhetoric going on there. So he comes off as way more sincere, I think, than sort of a Britain's Got Talent style thing. I can't see him trotting out some token singer, aspiring singer or something like that on stage to sing in his decisions around, I don't know, a cabinet eventually or something like that. And also I think that his appeal for talent is the most interesting thing to me in that regard. He has called for people who are like basically over 30 net taxpayer types who are committed to be what he wants to put forward as MPs, and then everyone else as support, basically, rather than something. Even though he said that he's keen on bringing in talent from the younger ranks, you know, and obviously Charlie, Harrison, and Lewis are part of that as strategists and so on. He's not doing the kind of green thing, which is kind of putting his entire political capital in the kids, you know, the Greens are doing the kids lean left, therefore we sort of take them for granted, and we'll put forward someone like Carla Denyer, for instance, as a councillor, that as an MP. That doesn't work in the same way. But yeah, I think we're generally agreed, which is that it doesn't seem to be that much of an online phenomenon. I think we'll get. Yeah, sorry.
I'll just say I spent about an hour today. You know how watching YouTube videos, and I was just, you know how like if you click on one, you get more of the same thing. So I was just spent about an hour watching like kind of normies, though. It was like they were sitting in like a works van or walking their dogs and this kind of thing, and they were giving their thoughts on it. So, like, yeah, they're posting it online, but they had their faces out, and they really were like just normal people. And all of them were sort of, we've been betrayed by Farage, he's a bullshit artist, and I'm going to go with Rupert Lowe. All of them were like that. I mean, it could be that that's just sort of what I was being fed, but I haven't really seen much sort of pushback except the vote splitting thing. But on this subject, one thing that's probably not going to be very popular, but it has to be said if we're serious. We have to sort of raise things that's on our mind. And so far, I think they've handled this well. But there is this sort of sense that when people are posting online, people like Charlie have to back, like people like Charlie or Rupert or young Bob, they're going to have to carry the candle for that when they go on these talk shows and television shows. And I wonder, because I was listening to Rupert Lowe did with on the Lotus Eaters. He had like an hour one-on-one with Carl earlier today, and he really does come across like a moderate. And I was watching it and I was thinking, I wonder if he knows like what's being said in like, does he know what he's unleashed here? Where it's like this legion of like hardcore, because the mainstream and Reform in particular have already picked up on this. And I think sooner or later, this is gonna be a problem. I think because they're gonna get asked questions, which either they go fully down a kind of ethno-nationalist sort of non-whites out kind of outlook on it, or they're gonna have to go in a different direction, which is perceived as soft, and they're gonna annoy a large part of the base who seem to have sort of slipped the leash. And I worry about this. When I look at Rupert, I watched something with him yesterday again, and I was thinking, because he's kind of just a Thatcherite, but he's sitting on top of this sort of sprawling mass of justified resentment, and much more incendiary issues. And I just find it kind of, I just find it strange. There's a kind of juxtaposition with the permanently online, as they get called, and then the sort of what we can say is the upper brass, which is Rupert and the young lads that he's got around him. But I would say, like, remember, the more extreme that you're posting on X, like the people in the real world who go on television are on the hook for that to a certain extent.
Well, yeah, it's a bit. Sorry, Nick, go on.
No, I was just going to say I also watched the Carl interview and I had some similar thoughts. I mean, Rupert said, you know, the younger people are more controversial than me, and I welcome that. It's all good, sort of thing. He acknowledged it, but he meant, you know, Charlie et al. I think, and he's saying they're a bit more, they get more stuck in than I do, and that's all good because I like to delegate. But yeah, I agree with Morgoth that does he know the extent of it? And you know, Pete North was saying, oh, this tore apart the Homeland Party and so on. And that's not a perfect analogy because Rupert is an MP, as I said. He is a high net worth individual. He used to run Southampton Football Club. You know, the internet will tell you his net worth is 30 million. He's got Musk, whatever you think to Musk. He's got him backing him. He's got Duncan Bannatyne wants to talk to him. And what I mean by all this is he can stay above the fray to a degree where he can just be like, I'm Rupert on the farm. And you do get the impression from him, he doesn't, as Morgoth said, doesn't really know that much about what's going on, which can be a strength because he's less accountable for it. But of course, obviously, at some point, the media, of course, is going to use this against him. They already are, in fact. And as Morgoth says, yeah, the younger people have to come out and answer for it. That's going to be the issue. And I agree. Rupert is a moderate. I think the whole framing should be, I mean, what do I know? But I think the framing should be that our leaders, our so-called leaders, are the extremists. The Boris wave was extreme. The things they've done are extreme. Illegal migrant situation is extreme. The rape gangs were extreme. What we're doing is just sensible old, British values. No, sorry, take that back. Not British values, because that's become a horrible debased term. But what we are is, the whole vibe is just we're just traditional Britain, which is true. It's tradition. It's barber jackets and farms and small state. That's going to be a slight issue, the economics as well, because he is a Thatcherite. He's a turbo Thatcherite because he loves Ayn Rand and quotes her every time he's on Carl's show. That will become an issue because the Zoomers will not be. And there's going to be that SDP kind of gap. There'll be more SDP on economics potentially. But yeah, he is going to face this issue of how much is he connected to these online S posters. To some degree, he doesn't have to address it, but at some point he might have to a bit.
I think there's it's going to be how hardline he ends up being on his policy outcomes for the big things that matter to the British public right now, and that main thing is going to be immigration. So if he doesn't back down at all on his immigration stance, then he's in a really good position. Like, I think the more radical elements of his party will and supporters will accept like a level of Thatcherism and so on, that just simply due to the level of state overreach there is currently. Like, he's not the guy who's going to completely reimagine state as a third of its existing size. I don't think that's going to even be achievable necessarily in one term either. So it's like, well, is his Thatcherism going to at least make the life less headachy for the average dissident, for the average person, because they have different goals? So it's like, oh, do I not feel targeted by the Eye of Sauron now? Is immigration coming down, or in reverse? Is something being done? Because part of the issue with reform, of course, is it collected all this energy and then appointed Robert Jenrick, who's suddenly started walking back. They're not even in power. They're not even an official opposition, and they've already walked back like a dozen policies, including notably dissolving the OBR and cutting tax. Right? He said deliberately. Jenrick said in his speech, "We're committed to cutting tax, but we're not going to do it until we get the deficit under control." Right? Because they're reforming in a Blairite kind of way. And at the very least, I think Rupert isn't Blairite, and I think the masses, so to speak, of people, even if they sit even to the right of Rupert's centre, are willing to accept that he's the best option that they've got, and that more interesting things will develop over time. That's my take on it. If anyone wants to come in.
What I would say is he's not just a Thatcherite, because he has said in that videos, the announcement video, he said specifically, Britain is not just an economic zone. And I think that was the huge, I mean, if you wanted to sort of, maybe it's simplistic, but I think that's a fairly good summary of Thatcherism, to think the monetarism, to see Britain as just an economic zone. That is why so much damage was done to Britain during the Thatcher government. So I don't think he's just a Thatcherite. I think he probably was at one point, but I don't think he is now. And then you've specifically got the rape gang issue, which he knows more about than most politicians. I'm sure he knows that that's not just a matter of economics. And then there's another one that they've got this report, a policy document about restoring the British pub. Again, you wouldn't do that if you were just thinking about economics. I think he understands that a country is a home, it's something meaningful, etc., etc. Now, to get back to the matter of what Morgoth was saying, I agree, and I've been writing an essay for Substack about this this whole thing, and in that I make this point that we should all be careful what we say online, because it's going to be put to the figures of Restore Britain. It's going to be used against them, and at some point they are going to have to disavow. At some point, somebody is going to say something so extreme and ridiculous that Restore Britain are going to have to disavow that statement. And that might trigger a bad reaction from people. And so I would say don't invite that to happen. Try to be careful what you say. Be measured and sensible about it. And then on Restore Britain's side, I would say to them, your radicals are useful. Try not to disavow them. If you can possibly avoid it, don't do it, because the left know this. The left understand this implicitly, that your radicals are a source of energy and momentum, as well as direction, and so you need them. And this is what the right have always labored on without. They've always dismissed the radicals, and so as a result, they've always been a weak force in British politics for 100 years now. And the result is the situation that we're in now. So I would say to Restore, try to avoid distancing yourself from the radicals.
I think
that's what I would say about that.
I think there was an interesting take on that, which was, I'm reminded of Charlie's Talk TV segment where someone said, "Oh, you're attracting extreme people," or something like that. And he was like, "Well, can you name them?" So it's like
Ian Collins.
Disavowing. And you can disavow an idea if it's not Restore policy, without necessarily disavowing individuals making their own decisions and holding opinions, which I think they've been pretty clean on so far. But I think you're absolutely right, Woes, on the direction there. Like
there's also a set of ways that I brought this up in the last roundtable that I was on. Cato, Twitter account, brought this up. He posted a tweet saying, "Here's how the left deal with this stuff," and I read it out there, so I won't do it again. But it's basically when someone from a party is presented with something outrageous that's been said by one of their supporters, they say, "Well, that's not my position. So here's my position. Why are we even talking about this?" So yeah, that's what I would say about that.
I think that's a good frame, because people are even saying to me, they're quoting things to me and saying, "Do you agree with these then?" And it's insulting me. I'm like, these are random people I've never even heard of. So they're even doing it to supporters of Restore. So they definitely will do it to Charlie even more. I think it's a good point. I mean, I'd written down, I forgot to say it, condemning the right makes you look like reform, or the sort of the sort of online right we're talking about. And embracing it's not possible because the media destroys it. So it is virtually impossible. Or it's very difficult, let's say. Let's not say impossible. So it's a good idea you have there. The problem is you're asking inherently imprudent people to be prudent. So, you're saying be careful what you post online, but by their nature, they're sort of, that's the whole thing, is that they're not. So, but it certainly is the right,
yeah.
It's the right thing to say to them, whether they'll do it. And then it's absolutely right to say to Restore, try not to just disavow them, because you've got people like Pete North, and sorry, Pete, but you post a lot, so it's just in my head. You've got him saying, they've got to go Civ now already, and so that's the whole, it's pointless, then, isn't it? If you go reform, it's over already. If you condemn everyone already, then what's the point? And those people are useful to push the Overton window. You can't abandon them, as you say, and the left don't do that. But so yeah, that idea is a sort of compromise, but that is going to be a challenge. You can't just disavow them immediately, or it's all over, right? But if you embrace them, the hit pieces will come.
On the whole, like Civ versus Eth debate as well, like I think stepping over that frame is also important, because it's like you can adopt either in the sense of you're speaking for the British people who are an ethnic groups, and you can also say from a civic perspective, the civic perspective is that the British people, that's who the British people allow to come in to merge with them, and in what way, and how, at what time. And at the moment, the civic argument is we don't want any of them, and quite a few of them to leave, and we made a mistake as a nation giving a whole bunch of them leave to stay here when they were openly hostile to us and forming colonies. So it's like it's too narrow. I feel like that frame itself is just a way to get pigeonholed quite easily there.
Yeah, and can I just add on that, when you're talking about colonies, it just reminds me, when you've got the likes of Jim Ratcliffe, you know, a billionaire, part owner of Man United, extremely mainstream and influential person, saying we've been colonized, that does put you in a different position whereby you can say far more what would be considered extreme things, or would have been considered extreme not long ago. That does say there's a sort of potential to get people like him on board, your Clarkson type people, and have a movement it is quite robust on immigration, to say the least, but isn't still considered extreme because of things like that. Although, of course, he got attacked by the whole media.
Yeah. I'm just going to move us on now to point 2 on the agenda, which is more of a practical concern. I don't expect us to spend massively long on this, but the point is Rupert Lowe is 68. Is he too old for the job? Now, it sounds like a silly question on the face of it, and there are some counters, but it's like Lowe now is a year younger than Trump was when he took office in 2016. And assuming that Labour sticks it out despite Farage's claims of like the forcing a general election next year, which is I think a potential scenario. But let's assume they're here till 29. Then that's 3 more years plus this year, and then he's got to do 5 years in office and set up a successor and things, or be continued. So he's going to be, he's going to be 78, nearly 80 years old at the time he finishes his premiership, if that happened. And so the question is like, can he maintain this energy, and his level of health and everything else until then? Or is it a case that we think he should be more of a, or maybe he's thinking that he's more of a, I'm dedicating my time into this, but I'm pretty much a stopgap for the next guy. I don't know.
I can go first if you want.
Yeah,
I've got a few. I won't say loads. I've got a few thoughts. Well, Farage, weirdly, I had a conversation with Farage about this when I was at GB News. That's when we thought Farage was still, the best bet. And I was saying to him, "Why don't you run, Nigel?" He's like, "Oh, I'll be too old. I'll be too old." And I said to him, "You won't be that old." And I gave him some analogies like the Trump one you just mentioned. So yeah, Trump was 70 his first term, 79 now, 78, I guess, when he won the second term. Pretty old. Churchill, whatever you think of Churchill, I know some people think he gave away the empire. Still, he got a lot done, even if that was one of the things he did. 65 for his first term, 76, about to turn 77 on his second term, and that's when age was age. He'd been in, a South African prison and stuff. It was a different time. So I think at 68, Rupert is all right. The other thing I'd say is that the brand is less dependent on him than it is with someone like Farage. I can really see Restore as a I hate the word brand, but you know what I mean. It has a certain vibe to it. The whole thing. It's earthy, muted colors, traditional. It's got that farm element. We even have farm parties in Holland now. The BBB, which is described as agrarian populist, which is just a term that I really like. So I think there's a brand there that can survive, after Rupert, more so than a Farage party. And I don't think he is too old, and he's got the younger generation, as we've discussed. That's my take.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Have you got anything on this, Woes, at all?
Well, 68. Yeah. So I guess, yeah. It's. I'm thinking about when they would actually get elected in. We don't know when that would be, but whatever. It's a matter of a few years. Yeah. I think as Nick just said, it's not so tied to an individual. And that's good. And that's, again, time and again, you see that Restore is different from Reform, because Reform, this is an example of it. Reform is really just the Nigel Farage show. And I think that's his personality. And it's one of the reasons that it's also repugnant now that the Reform haven't sought out talent. They haven't devised policy. It's just a few. I mean, it was really just Richard Tice and Zia Yusuf, who I think most people again find repugnant. And then and then it's a bunch of defecting Tories. I mean, it's a complete farce. Whereas I think that Restore Britain, it seems inevitable that Rupert Lowe is going to look for talent and bring them on board. I think he wants genuinely qualified, high quality people to be doing this, because I think he's not insecure about his leadership potential, his leadership acumen. So I think that he won't be threatened. I think that he'll be quite comfortable bringing on high quality people, and that's what is then going to take over from him in 5 years or so, or whenever he wants to step aside. I think it's a very good sign that he's brought on young people from the start. I've got this thing about the gerontocracy in America, but you also see it here as well. I mean, why a bunch of Tories in reform? It's ridiculous. There are plenty. There's an abundance of young people in Britain aching to make a difference. So I think it's a thing. I think it's necessary to have young people involved, but I also think it's good that it's Rupert Lowe who's actually in charge, because I think he's a experienced, steady, stable, all the rest of it. Things that one doesn't necessarily associate with young men. So I think he's going about it in the right way. Given his slightly advanced age, yeah, I think he's aware of that. He just seems like a guy who's trying to do the right thing. And I don't want to be, showering him with praise, but this does seem like a really great turn of events.
Yeah, I think that's all we'll want to say on that. I think one of the people in chat said something along the lines of, he just seems like he did his business stuff. He's got the right incentives. He doesn't seem particularly power hungry, but he's still got that drive to be able to push things through, and he doesn't have the same financial constraints or desires, and he seems comfortable. I think that's the thing. He seems comfortable with it. Although I did see him giving his speech on the farm sort of immediately post in Great Yarmouth, and he was a little bit stuttery, but I think it was mostly the cold and off the cuff speaking. So no, I'm encouraged. I think the answer is probably no. He's not too old, but we shall pray to keep him in good health, I suppose. Right. Question 3 is: will Restore be co-opted and contained? Will there be the Restore Britain Jewish Alliance and so on and so forth that come in, for instance, and make it all about them?
Israel.
Yeah, I have seen a troll account with this name that's appeared lately, but it's also got the handle Inevitable West without the T at the end. So I'm like, there's possibly a thing going on there.
Probably an Indian.
So yeah, in terms of being co-opted and contained, essentially. Is Restore going to take defectors? I know Rupert has said definitively that they're not going to take politicians, which I think is a really positive stance, assuming that he can attract the correct talent from industry. Because again, that's the huge part of this is like the Reform have gone with a line of, look, the reason that we took these defectors, the reason that I've got Jenrick and Suella Braverman and Nadeem Zawahi or whatever, is because they have interfaced with the civil service, and they know how bad they can be, so they must know how to counter them, right? That's his argument, one of the big arguments for why he's taken them. And Restore is going the opposite direction. We're not taking any defectors. We won't accept your the chaff who have ushered in 3 decades of absolute misery for this country. So what do we think about containment? What could that containment look like, and how will Restore avoid it, I suppose? Feel free, anyone.
Nick, you go first.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll go first, but I'm not an expert. I feel like this is like Nima's area. But I'll give it a go. So people are already attacking Restore or trying to glom onto them based on foreign interest, and both, of course, are dangerous. So I've seen a guy attacking them on grounds of their foreign policy, Restore's foreign policy, saying, "Oh, it's just a few bullet points." And Pete North, again, sorry, Pete, was retweeting this guy, and I said, "But this guy is just worried that they'll put Britain first. He's just attacking because I could see from his whole profile that certain foreign interests were of most importance to him." And then Pete's like, "Well, it doesn't matter because the point is the policies are too basic and crude and not thought out." Maybe, but the point is it was a disingenuous attack. So I've seen already people trying to attack them because they have their own agenda, and I've also seen this attempt to attach them to foreign interests, and then people saying, "Oh, we don't want that either." So of course these are dangerous. This is a threat when you need money. These things are a little bit above my pay grade in terms of how they work, but it's clear that we see again and again people becoming compromised because of lobbying and funding, particularly in America, but also here. And it seems to be almost a case of pick your favorite Middle Eastern country. If it's not one, it's the other. Tucker Carlson, they say he doesn't like Israel, but then he's Tucker Carlson. So it seems almost unavoidable. I know I don't think it's going to quite catch on that it's not quite catchy enough. But so it is tricky. And it's always hard to know, again, with Rupert, how aware he is or how bothered he is by these things. I think it was Morgoth that posted something where someone had asked him about this, and he said, no, we've not been approached by anyone, and we'll always put Britain first. Okay, so he said that at least. But to me, not knowing how high-level investment works, I would just say the key is probably to offset this threat by attracting this counter-elite, to use Dominic Cummings' kind of language, or that elite theory language, a counter-elite of patriots such as Jim Ratcliffe could be one, Clarkson could be one, even Dyson could be one, who was,
Duncan Bannatyne has been making.
I was going to say Duncan Bannatyne has already said, "Let's chat." So he was my safe one, but I was adding some potential other ones. These people, Clarkson is very much a Rupert Lowe kind of guy, so they fit with them. Dyson was pro-Euro back in the day, but then he was pro-Brexit. Just some examples of people who are more solid. Now, they won't necessarily satisfy the absolute, most hardcore online followers, but they'll be the kind of people who are much better to get on board than foreign interests. So I think that is what you want to do. It is tricky, though. This, to me, of all the things we're discussing, is probably the main threat, just because of the nature of requiring funding.
Yeah, I would agree that it's going to be the funding. That's going to be the way that this happens, if it happens. And let's hope that it doesn't. But this is how it always seems to play out, that eventually you find out that the funders behind something starts to cuck and buckle and betray its original principles, and then eventually you find out, it's got a funder with a certain kind of surname, and then it suddenly makes sense. And it suddenly makes sense why they're always going on about a certain Middle Eastern country and seem to lose sight of the problems in their own country. So yeah, that's a key thing, and it's impossible for us to know, really. We can only go by what are the signs just now, and the signs just now are that this is a party, an organization that is acutely aware that Britain is in a dire state, and is acutely aware that all of the other parties are corrupt, and presumably is aware that other parties that have materialized to try to address this situation mysteriously fall by the wayside or cuck, but become diluted and then lose their purpose. So all of this is already played out many times. We've seen this syndrome, and I think that the people at Restore Britain, one can only hope that they are aware of this and will avoid it, and will be able to avoid it. Again, that depends on where the money comes from, and of course you've got to remember that we might think that Duncan Bannatyne is based, that he's complaining about Islam on Twitter, and the burqa and so on, but he might have some limits to that. He might say, okay, I'm happy for you to oppose the takeover of Britain by Islam, but X, Y, and Z. So again, but the weird thing is, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'll say it briefly. Duncan Bannatyne is 77. I had no idea that he was that old. So again, there's this danger that with money, it tends to be in the hands of people who are older, for obvious reasons, and they tend not to quite realize how bad things are. That's the cliche. So yeah, as I said, there's no way that we can know whether it's going to be co-opted and contained. I think from outside, they're going to try to contain it. And we've seen similar things with the AfD in Germany, where all the other parties bend every rule in order to prevent the AfD from growing. They do everything they can. And I suspect that we're going to see the same thing here with Restore. But as for it internally being corrupted, let's just hope not. I do think that it's a bunch of very intelligent guys who are involved just now. And I hope that they have the sense and the will to resist what is certainly going to be attempted against them.
Yeah, it's I think they're going to be quite savvy, especially the younger guys. He is taking he seems quite connected up with people who have come under this kind of scrutiny and attack before. As much as people there are mixed opinions, for instance, on Carl Benjamin, right? And his role in the space and how radical he is or normie he is, and whether and how philosophical he is versus anything else. But he does know how to navigate the media landscape, and he's matured a lot, definitely, certainly since creating Lotus Eaters. So I think his advice is probably going to be taken on board as a subject matter expert, so to speak, by Lowe, and avoiding being contained by interest. But I do think that money is the interesting thing, right? Whether or not people with money. I don't think, obviously, we're going to see a Zia Yusuf situation where just someone comes in and is like, I would like to buy the chair position for £300,000, please. I don't think he's going to tolerate that. But I am curious now what pressures will be levied upon him to alter course, so to speak, to change the vehicle from himself, but from his vision for what the British want, basically.
See, one interesting thing is that from the off, he said that Rupert Lowe has said that halal and kosher are going to be banned.
Yeah,
and that's a very, brave thing to say, or it's a very naive thing to say. We don't know yet, because it immediately offends, the Muslims, but also the Jews. So it's
well, that's
interesting.
the news story that's come out today, right? Is that it won't affect many Muslims apparently in the country because so many of them don't practice, but it will cause the mass departure of Jews from Britain, apparently.
Although there's also the question, some of them can import it, and there's also quite a few that don't follow it. I've seen Jewish people saying they're not bothered, or that they can import it. So it's whether you also ban the import, apparently. Well, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know necessarily if he'd ban the import, because he would maintain his sort of free trade in that way. But he's just like, we won't do it on. He specifically said we won't do it on our land. So he's not interested in doing it in Britain, certainly, which is just a joy to hear someone there. And I think one of the things I really like about the fact that Rupert's doing this is that he's someone who already has a sitting seat in Parliament, right? It's not like an agent provocateur like Nick Tenconi, for instance, or Ben Habib, who's always been the outsider. Basically, it's someone whose people like him enough already to vote for him, right? He already has traction at home. And that's right. Sorry, I'm tangenting there.
Yeah, no, I think he's just being intellectually consistent and on the because of course you got to ban halal. Then yeah, why not kosher? I think that's the right thing. I notice he emphasizes it less, but he does say they'll ban both, and that's probably the right stance. Well, principle-wise, it is.
Again, again, the moral arguments that can be made for his policies are dead simple, right? And it's really difficult to disagree with. We ban non-stun slaughter because it's unethical according to the view of the British people, right?
Yeah.
Which is an impossible question to answer for like the other parties, because they don't know who the British people are, right? They can't define it. It's just this sort of like weird amalgam melting pot of different ethnic groups and the admixture that led to the white people who happen to inhabit Britain, sort of thing, because they can't name them directly as distinct groups. So the fact that he even has a concept of the collective we as his voter base is just encouraging, because he's advocating for that. And I think that's where most of the attacks will actually come onto him from, is this idea of like, oh, do you not think X or Y brown person is actually British, right? So, but I think they'll be well schooled in countering that, I'm sure. And he's going to have been hardened by the Grooming Gang report, which I spoke about a little bit on Ed Dutton's show last week, at the beginning of the week, which was saying that, you know, because they were saying, why is everyone ignoring his review? And part of the reason, aside from they don't want to know, and a lot of them are complicit and stuff like that, is that it's a huge. They would have to acknowledge the racial component of it in both senses, right, in terms of perpetration and victims. So, whereas he's kind of got that, he's got the sense of that, I think. Anyway. Yeah, sorry, I'm just double checking, because Morgoth, for those of you who haven't read the chat, Morgoth's internet has dropped out, and
I thought he was offended by when we attacked Nigel Farage. I thought that's what it was.
No, you know, apparently he's lost all the power in his house. So
it's a problem with the North. Believe me, I'm from there. I know all about it. We only just got electricity.
I am nudging on on him and a substitute guest as well, so don't worry, we'll see what comes of that. But in the meantime, we'll keep cracking. So I think we've sort of discussed containment here, and now I want to get on to the principle, the normie perspective of, oh, Lowe is coming in and he's just splitting the right-wing vote. Reform is the only thing that will keep us going. I had a comment on something. I said something along the lines of read the room, join Restore Britain. I'll just quickly share that tab, actually, because it's an amusing little share screen. And this tab here. So, yeah. So this, I hope I don't get betrayed. Betrayal Factory with Reform UK. Yes, it's a bit of a cringe meme, but there we go. Read the room. And someone had said under this something along the lines of, you aren't in the room. You're in the X fantasy where the real world doesn't intrude on your delusional messianic personality cult. IRL things are a little different. And I know that that's going a bit more into the, is this just a purely online phenomenon? But this sort of rhetoric is quite common for, how should I put it, like the Reform voter, right? Like, this is just a cult, you're just splitting the vote. Reform are the only people who can get in, otherwise you're just getting the uniparty.
Well,
and I think
all of that is nullified by the fact that Reform are the uniparty, so it doesn't matter. I mean, if they get in, so what? So what? Yeah. What is gained? I mean, most of their MPs are going to be former Tories who were responsible for the Boris wave and the Afghan asylum debacle. So what kind of step forward is it to get a Reform government? You know, a few months ago, you could have said, well, at least it's not the Tories. But now you can't even say that anymore.
Yeah. And that, yeah, go on, Nick.
No, I was just going to say, and the funny thing is, not only are they the uniparty, they're also the messianic personality cult. I mean, these people attack you for everything they are. It's the most level 1 projection. Like, what is more of a personality cult than Nigel Farage? I mean, it's so funny the things they choose to attack you about. But I've been getting so many attacks on them. But yeah, I mean, go on.
Yeah, no, it has been a pure mask off moment. Again, I'm just drawn to some of that woman on Talk TV again, and it's like, or on GB News, and it's just like it's such a bought platform for Farage in so many ways.
Oh, tell me about it. I was stupid enough to criticize him on there, but hardly anyone would.
Yeah, was that why you were let go? You reckon?
No, it wasn't. No. That was because an idiot destroyed our show and was an idiot and was on constantly and booking it and producing it and was just a total idiot who everyone hated. No, it's much simpler than that. But Farage, no, it's clear that it's Reform TV. I even started mocking my friend Paul, who does it regularly. I don't like to do it anymore, but I just go, yeah, it's Reform TV. That's what it is. It's very clear. I mean, at least they've had Charlie on and people like that, but Rupert's still banned. Camilla had him on when he was banned because I think she just overrode that. But he's essentially banned, and yeah, it's pure Reform TV.
And I have been tracking the numbers for Reform, which are interesting because they've had a little bit of an upswing in members since Restore. Well, more importantly, since they announced their shadow cabinet, so they're up to about 280,000 members now, whereas Restore are on, I think they've passed 70,000, but I don't know if they're at 80,000 yet. They were getting 10,000 a day at one point because they started from about 40,000, I think, who had joined as movement members before it became an official party. So you have to take that into account a little bit. But they've still had tremendous growth. So I'm curious, when they say splitting the vote, I would expect to see a kind of corresponding downturn in the membership of Reform anyway. So it's like, whereas I'm looking at the disaffected, like 25 million voters who didn't turn out at the last general election to vote for Starmer, right? Which allowed Starmer to get in, right? All the disaffected Tory voters who hate the Tory party now, all the red wall voters who hate Labour and hate the Tories and gave it their vote to Boris Johnson and were utterly betrayed. And those people who are not captured by the traditional polls. So I'm like, I don't even know if it's... we have a Morgoth appearing. I don't know if it's entirely... if it would even split the vote at all. Like, I think Reform probably just picked up a bunch of Tories and hopeful radicals, and then when they're going to be easy to hemorrhage them and pick up the people who've looked at Reform and gone, I'm not voting for that Farage chap, he's just the same as the rest, you know.
Yeah. Can I share this? This is just quite funny. Yeah. Just on this topic. It's a poll that I actually had 14k. Now it's got apparently 13k, but someone's unliked. But I said Reform UK is splitting the vote by pretending to be a right-wing party. All pragmatic people must come across to restore Britain. And I was basing it on this poll where Restore got 67%, Reform was 24% from 23,000 votes on GB Politics. Obviously, that's just an online poll, but there are a few things like that. I think we have to totally reject this idea of it splitting the vote. That would be incredibly funny if there was a coalition. What if Restore got a certain amount of votes and Reform got a certain amount, and Farage had to do a coalition with Rupert? I mean, there's kind of a funny scenario, but do you know what?
It's less funny because like, we know what coalition governments are like. So
yeah, I know.
At the very least, in that scenario, you'd want Restore to be the majority. But obviously, we know what the Tory Lib Dem one was like. Good grief.
Do you know what's weird though? Is it? Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say it's weird that. Welcome back to Morgoth, but it's weird that Restore are actually closer to the Tories than Reform in a sense, which people might not like. But Rupert pointed out on the Carl interview today, Kemi backed him on the grooming gangs inquiry, and Rupert, as we've discussed earlier or hinted at, is an old Tory essentially. And I'm on my farm, small state, please. Man in Westminster has no clue. Or equally, when he was running big businesses, you stay out of my business, clueless public sector. He's kind of an old Tory. And whereas Reform and this slick thing imported from America, from MAGA, and then they're also now the new Tories, Jenrick checking his speech with George Osborne. What? It's the most kind of grotesque kind of, they're the slick careerist Tory that we've seen lately, the Cameronite Tory, if you will. So they're a kind of new type of Tory, and they've gone straight into Reform. But Restore are closer to a branch of the old Tories, a sort of old posh bloke in the shires, basically, and then the working class version of it, which you have where I'm from, where all the joiners and the police and the plumbers were Tories and Masons, frankly. But that's more what Restore fit with than Reform, strangely, when we're talking about splitting votes. And I just one more thing I had on that. Oh yeah, and of course the Kemi Tory party now is just leftist. I mean, the Gavin Barwells and the Ruth Davison and the Prosper UK, they're just leftists. To me, they're neither here nor there. They're just like Cameron let these people in or something. They're just an aberration. But Rupert's actually more aligned with old Tory values, whereas Reform represents this new slick Toryism. That's my claim anyway. But as for splitting the right, I just reject. Yeah, I reject that Reform really is a right-wing party. I think there are centre-left liberals. I've said for ages they're actually more like, even though I'm mixing up my analogies, they're more like the old 90s Lib Dems, whereas Restore is something new. Go on.
So just to steel man you there, the other argument would be that Reform's facade is convincing enough to the right, so to speak, to the normie right, as it were, and so even though they're not right-wing, in the same way the Tories are not right-wing and were not right-wing, they were considered the right-wing vote, and right-wing people voted for them because they had nothing better, or they were taken in by Get Brexit Done or whatever there. That's the steel man, is that they could split the vote because people do not perceive, like you and I, that Reform are a left-wing party.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The Reform are a left liberal and left centre, and so are the Tories are left woke, and then Restore are some sort of throwback, I think.
Let Morgoth come in and disagree with everything that we've said for the past 15 minutes. It'd be marvelous.
I don't really know what you've been saying because my electric went off. I just had to run down my mum's to get 50 pence to chuck in the meter like the old days. I mean, I'll go over because it's an important one. The will Restore be co-opted and contained? I missed that one entirely. I think this is the big danger, to be honest. Now, luckily, we've got some good people around Rupert, but this is the danger. So, I mean, we can fight against it, we can push back against it, and I think it's kind of like, well, what are your deal breakers? And again, you straight because everybody's so happy and everybody's so jubilant that there's something has finally happened. You have to. It seems cruel, and it seems it's going to be like Morgoth's here to just sort of piss all over the bonfire and leave us all sitting in the cold. But at the end of the day, I was thinking, what would be my deal breakers on this? And say the kind of the 1980s style economics. There's the kind of the boomer pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of stuff a little bit. I'll kind of put up with that. I'm not. All I want to be is like a good team player, and I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm not going to moan. I'm not going to cause trouble. I want to go along with that as well. And then there was, say, something like if they come out and they back like sort of a war with Iran, or if Rupert does, because this is the thing, the lads that are around Rupert probably won't do that, and we don't know if Rupert would do that either. So because this is all new, we don't know where we are. But you have to, if that did happen, then what are you going to? This is what I mean, right? When I saw a lot of the Americans, they got all excited about Trump and Trump's second term, and it was base, and it was going to be that, and then little by little, you saw them kind of rationalize away a lot of the influence, a lot of the perversive influence on the Trump administration. And throughout sort of 2023, 2024, I got this impression that a lot of sort of our peers in America were willfully turning a blind eye to this. And they could rationalize it that, okay, if that group and that the lobby, as they call it on YouTube, if they get the foreign policy, then maybe we'll get deportations. And what's going to happen is, if that's where Restore goes, personally, I don't think it is, which means they're going to get even more pressure if they don't bend the knee to this. And in other words, if they don't kind of sign up for the lobby's agenda, then I think it'll be sort of put to them, well, the gloves will really come off. I think that's where this will go. And I think we have to be prepared for it. And talking about it is not like being blackpilled or anything. It's just a realistic assessment. What happens if sort of Tommy Robinson jumps on board? Again, I don't think that's going to happen. I feel that Rupert is becoming very adept. I noticed on Dan Wooten last night, he was kind of, there was a surprise sprung on him where the fella who runs UKIP was kind of stream sprung on him. And it was like, well, I'll merge UKIP with Restore. And Lowe politely declined using football analogies and having too many star players on the pitch and all of this kind of thing. But he basically gave him the high hat in a polite way, which I thought was very interesting and very good. And if he can keep that up, wonderful. But if he does, and it's these more powerful groups, then I think you'll find that there'll be real pressure applied. A little sort of a little hint of this was when young Bob was on the Alex Phillips show, and at the end, everybody cut this, but they didn't cut all of it. They cut it where at the end she gave this kind of veiled threat where she said, well, maybe there is a right-wing censorship, and I'm worried about your future and all the rest of it. But what if you actually listen to the end, what she said, it was Ofcom. And what she was saying was basically that if you think you're going to keep popping up on all of these shows saying these things, Ofcom's going to get involved, and you might find yourself just banned from the telly or something, like banned from being platformed at the behest of Ofcom. And so it was kind of like she was invoking these higher priests of the managerial state, like, you know, the end of game bosses that are embedded within the permanent bureaucracy. And so these are the screws which will be applied, I think, if they don't say, well, okay, we're all in for wars with Iran, we're going to go and kiss the wall in Israel. Because, look, this is what everybody's saying. And what's going to happen is, if we don't sort of say this, everybody's going to get a Fell For It Again award. And I'm not saying that this couldn't happen. In my own view, is that I think they're going to try and not go down that route. But we'll see. But what I don't want is to have everybody. I can think of a couple of people who are just going to sit back and shit all over this. And then if that happens, they'll be just like dishing out Fell For It Again awards and rubbing everybody's face into it. So let's not pretend that there's no chance of this happening or there's no risk. It is a thing. It's just how power functions and works. So we'll see. All we can do is we'll see. But let's be sort of wide-eyed and clear-headed about it.
Yeah, what's funny is, even without you listening, we all basically agree on that that's the main threat, and it's going to happen through money and the necessity of funding, and that's the danger. So it's weirdly we all sort of agree that's the main threat. Just can I just apply 2 minor points? Yeah, one, Rupert is good at giving the high hat, which I love. That. It sort of reminds me of Miller's Crossing, in it. But he's just naturally like that. So I think that was a good thing about him. He's also given the high hat to Advance, which has obviously annoyed some people. I have one minor quibble about Alex Phillips. Overall, she was definitely being pro-Farage containment. She's an absolute Farage devotee. I mean, I've seen her with Farage at parties, and, you know, she just loves Farage. I don't think I'm being controversial. It's well known she just loves Farage. But when she said Ofcom, to some degree, that's just because I've done so much Ofcom regulated telly, live telly. To some degree, that is just a nervous presenter going, "This guest is off the hook," and stop saying the stuff. But it doesn't change the point that overall she is still sort of saying, "Yeah, you're going too far, and I'm trying to contain you," and she's doing it in a concerned, trolling way.
I think, as well to say, is like it's the freest moment it's been. If we go back to our discussion of, is Restore a purely online phenomenon, and we kind of came to the position that the line between the analog and the digital has been forever blurred at this point, and is more blurred than it's ever been before. So the needing to kneel is less prevalent now. As you say, it just comes down to who has the money power. We brought up at the time Duncan Bannatyne, and whether or not he was out of he was part of counter jihad, but maybe out of touch with what voters want on other issues and restores position on that, and he might try and press Rupert to renege on a few of those other promises or not go far enough. And not that we've got anything against Duncan. There's no evidence of that. It's just that's a potential scenario, a hypothetical we're throwing out there. So I think it will be interesting to see where the authority lies, right? Something that's going around in my head is like, it's always reform friends of a country in the Middle East, right? Or whatever it happens to be. It's never at certain tribes friends of Britain, right? Or friends of Restore. It's never the other way around, right? So, but because politicians are inherently politicians, and most of them have never had a quote unquote real job. It's easy for them to be pushed around when they don't really know what they're talking about until when they're in a particular position. So if Rupert is able to attract the talent that he wants, really successful business people with a British people first mindset and everything like that, he'll have enough ammunition to kind of to waylay essentially attempts at containment by in the same way that Tony Blair bizarrely did. There was a great scene, I can't remember what show it was on, where someone was questioning him about a particular policy, and he basically just shot back, have you ever run a country? Well, I have, and that's why I think the way I think about XYZ, right? And basically kowtowed the audience member, and it worked. Like people were he was convincing in his defense there. So it's like you can build an impenetrable or a nigh impenetrable. I say never totally a nigh impenetrable defense simply by having competent people in the right places to back up your positions, basically, so that you're not able to be pushed, or if you get pushed, like it's going to be really minor compared to someone who's convinced by their first trip to another country, for instance, so to speak. Anyone else want to come in on that?
There's only one other point. It's a tangent, but I just, as we record, I've seen this tweet, and I've not been able to watch it because we're recording, but Rupert Lowe is addressing young white men directly, and Elon Musk is quote tweeting it. And, Lowe's saying there's nothing wrong with being white, there's nothing wrong with being a man, there's nothing wrong with being straight. This is the only reason it's related to this is that's another area where they're going to go after him harder because he's the only one saying that. But that's also a key distinction between him and Reform, because you just won't quite get them saying things like that because they're so Sibnat. So that's another area where they'll hate him.
Do you know what? That's brought up an interesting point of not just containment forces, but containment issues. So I think if he kind of sticks to British and knows what he means by British, as in our specific ethnic groups and heritage, then he'll do well. If he gets dragged too far into the containment issues of like, I wouldn't even say anti-whiteism is a containment issue. That's not really what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking more like the trans debate, which basically paralyzed half of Parliament for the last 10 years and stuff like that, right? These sort of really somewhat impactful but really minor issues in the grand scheme of things. Like you can talk about trans issues all you want once you've deported 10 million people, right? Like that's a different question. So I think if he manages to avoid the kind of social milieu of like, because he wants to I'm sure like the Reform guys, he wants to abandon the Equality Act, right? And if that's the case, then he's going to come under that same kind of scrutiny. Oh, you're discriminating against the XYZ people, etc. And that's really a containment issue. It's It's more about the principle of British fairness, or fairness in the British sense, and what's right. And as long as he keeps that kind of moral frame in the positive for himself, then I think he can avoid a lot of containment slip-ups.
Yeah, and you just remind me there of a small point, just quickly. Suella Braverman's speech at the Reform Shadow Cabinet, as they called it, unveiling, was so 10 years ago. It was trans is bad, massive round of applause. It was Michaela School is great, yeah, and it was like pure Civnat, so-called classical liberalism of 10 years ago. You just reminded me there that they still think, when you say that's a minor, of course it is a minor issue in the scheme of things, but to Reform supporters, that's still like a huge breakthrough.
So yeah, thanks for coming on that as well, Morgoth. Really great to have your input there. We did talk a bit about Restore splitting the vote as well, which I'm putting words in people's mouths, but we came to the opinion that I think Woes put it best at the beginning. We know Reform isn't right-wing, so you can't be splitting the right-wing vote in that sense, because there's only one right-wing party, and the second, or the only one viable one, I suppose. And then the other side of that being the steel man, that the facade, the mask that Reform wears, being convincing enough that that Reform splits the vote essentially away from the right, because people are still deceived by Farage. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I just see the situation, like say 2 weeks ago, was that we just had two Tory parties, and I was just not going to vote. So I would kind of just given up, because we talk about the T1000, and it seems like they just spawned themselves into a new party, like they created a new host. And I've got no doubt that Robert Jenrick will become the leader of Reform, and then it'll merge fully back into the Conservative Party at some point. I think it was all planned out. I think it was a conspiracy. I think it was because the problem is, if you go back to the sort of zero seats thing, and I'm not saying that it was all just like us online that did that. I think everybody was just horrified by the Boris wave and by the lies and just scummy nature of the Tory party. So it was destined to get binned. And they probably had focus groups out telling them that. And so I think it was, they were given the green light, they would have had like a kind of contingency plan where the lies finally catch up with them. And it's like, well, we need to create a new host to sort of to respawn in another way. And so it's kind of interesting, because now the containment is under siege as well. And I think, and I do think it is as well. Like I do think it's genuinely under attack, and I think this is why it's probably going to get quite ugly. And I think Lowe and the lads recognise that. I think we all should. But it's like on the problem that they had was that if you create a space on the right where there's the Tory party is kind of broken, then it's dangerous for the regime. There's instability there. Something could pop up on that fertile ground. So they planted something there on purpose to head that off. But now that itself is under attack. And what this tells you is that it isn't just people moving from Reform to Restore. The fact that is even possible. I mean, I could get into the mistake that was made here. Basically, they didn't actually contain. I did a lengthy tweet to Alex Phillips the other day on this. The mistake that they made was that they didn't actually contain the dissident forces. They ostracized them. And so what happened was that the sort of the system, the citadel, threw out all of these people, and then they just milled around on the outside waiting for a chance to come and attack them again. That's not like what was supposed to happen. Was that Farage brought them in and led them up a cul-de-sac, and that hasn't worked. So you find yourself, just in terms of the sort of power dynamics of the British regime, is that it's in an interesting place at the moment, because it seems as if they're under attack from something which they didn't expect. Like a kind of wild card has popped up, and we'll see how they adapt to that. I mean, what we were talking about containment before, that's the big worry, we all know. But it's just bad politics. On the other hand, well, I mean, we were talking earlier about the problem with having a kind of radical base, and then you have to have sensible people at the top, and they might have to answer for what's going on down below. And of course, this is what Farage saw as well, and his bar for that was to just ban everybody and get rid of everybody left, right, and centre. And this created kind of the momentum that we see now. So yeah, I didn't actually think that I had an option until Restore came along. There's no splitting the vote, because I just didn't think I had an option. I think there's a serious risk of a Farage wave. I mean, my contempt for the centre right of British politics knows no bounds. No bounds.
Yeah.
I despise all of them. They make me sick. Just think about that. Just think about the idea that, well, we're going to set up with, we understand your concerns. We understand the Tories have lied to you, and now it's time to reform. Now I'm gonna wave the banner of the long forgotten Brit, and you get like a year and a half, 2 years in, and it's obvious that it's just another tentacle of the establishment. It's and you know, the whole thing in 2023 with Farage dancing around with Priti Patel at some Tory piss up behind closed doors. They're not against each other, and then he starts filling up the another thing. Right, while I'm on my high horse here, is this idea that we need like all of these Tories in because they've got experience, and it really, like, you know who one of the most powerful politicians is, and a senior politician in this country right now is David Lammy. Are we really going to pretend that the people who've been in government are these like super highly competent, like people who know how they know how to grease the wheels and they know how to get things done? The people who run look at Angela Rayner. The people who are in government are retards. And when Lowe's calling out for these people who ran businesses, they've been in corporations, they've owned farms, or all of this, they've been in the army, I just think they are more intelligent and highly competent than David Lammy. I don't think it's that much of a hard job, to be quite honest.
Yeah, the people have experience. They have experience of ballsing up the country. And I totally agree. The contempt that Reform has shown is incredible. They didn't need to go that far in proving how much they hate us. I mean, telling Stephen Edgerton we can't do mass deportations, telling him I don't care about the decline of the white British demographic, saying we will lose twice on Winston Marshall in regards to standing up to Islam, kicking out Rupert Lowe, which aside from the personal behavior being appalling, was also symbolically a kick in the teeth for anyone that felt Rupert represented them. And then all this combined with the fact that I have to get tweets every day from these cultists who, as you say, they're nothing to do with me. I'm like, why are these people attacking me? They may as well be attacking me for not voting Green or Lib Dem. I absolutely agree. These people, Reform have proved repeatedly, they're absolutely nothing to do with us. And they're going to give us not 50% or 60% or 40%, but 0% of anything you want. So I got quite worked up as well there.
Yeah. And this is why I think we've got to try to convey this to people who are still flying the flag for reform, that they are utterly wasting their energy and time and money in some cases, because the whole thing is a charade. I mean, in a sense, it's not even the Nigel Farage show. It's just a rebranding of the Conservative Party, and even the rebranding itself might be disposed of in the future when they merge back into the Conservative Party. So the whole thing is not even a runaround. It's grotesque. It's morally grotesque what has been done here. And to what extent it was planned beforehand, I don't know. But maybe it was. Maybe the whole thing was just a deliberate deception from the start. to pick up on something Morgoth said about the competence, I agree. I mean, David Lammy, I mean, I've said before, well, there's no need to get personal, but let's just say he's clearly not the most competent man on the planet. But that points to a danger for Restore in the future, which is maybe the people who we see, the cabinet and so on, are actually not really in charge of it much at all, and it's the civil servants who are actually doing things, who are actually running things. In which case, you can get rid of these dummies, you can replace these morons. But you'll then have to deal with a much more clever and resourceful civil service. And of course, everyone knows about Yes Minister from 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, where it's really the civil servants who are in charge. And the politicians, the ministers, the democratically elected representatives of the people are just led by the nose by these civil servants. That's something that, obviously it's cross the bridge when we come to it, but it is something that we should be aware of, and Restore should certainly be aware of. When they get into power, as I hope they do, they're going to have to go to war with the civil service and really gut it out of almost everyone who's there. Because if David Lammy can have a career in politics, in government, then something is going on, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty damning indictment of the current state of the political class, and I agree with it, obviously. I do think, in terms of other factors, I'm thinking now as well about UKIP and Advance UK, because Nick Tenconi posted, not a big Nick Tenconi fan, but he posted today something like, I extended the hand to Ben Habib, and now I'm extending the hand to Rupert Lowe. Come see me, guys, whenever you like. So that's kind of sort of a desperation there. And Habib, sorry, I'll just finish this thought. And Habib has also said, I set up Advance UK with the idea of Rupert at the helm, and it wasn't the right time, but I did that. So why are you rejecting me now, sort of thing, when he wants to merge the two parties? And I think it's just probably the case that people in Advance currently who hold positions of relative power, and again, relative to themselves, will want equivalent positions in the more successful Restore Britain, and that will require a huge amount of vetting and everything, and I think Rupert just wants to retain a lot more control by just letting them. If people want to move from Advance to Restore, they will. If Ben Habib wants to commit the resources of Advance that he's accrued from 40,000 members to the coffers of Restore, that's just going to be something he has to choose to do on his own. The natural life cycle of alternate parties is going to be not that they merge, but that they die, basically, to allow the other one to thrive. Yes, Morgoth.
I mean, on that, I think if what's happening, I totally understand why Rupert Lowe does not want a load of leaders with a bit of clout in his party, and I think he's made the right decision. Like I say, I watched that on Dan Wooten's The Little Exchange thing. But when I was watching it, I was thinking as well, though, like, I mean, to be fair, the situation with Ben Habib, they did seem to have some kind of arrangement, so I'm going to tread carefully around that. It is what it is. But just to sort of make light of a situation, do you remember There Will Be Blood, when Daniel Plainview did the "I'll drink your milkshake" thing? Like, yeah. I basically think what's going to happen is that Rupert Lowe is kind of like Daniel Plainview, and he's just going to drink all their milkshakes. And what I mean is, I'm going to drink your milkshake. I'm going to drink it up. And I think like their base is just going to drain away to Restore. and he doesn't actually have to have the leaders. I think they're just going to jump ship to the new game in town, and you're going to have these kind of leaders sitting on top of like dead parties. Which, to be honest, I thought that's what UKIP was anyway.
UKIP became a kind of glorified protest movement slash. I mean, basically, Nick Tenconia spent the last 2 years leading groups of 50 to 100 people in marches around northern towns, whilst he shouts from a megaphone and occasionally throws a Roman. Nothing relevant.
We don't want that. We want this laser-like focus on the institutions of power and the quangos and all of that, which is what they've been doing in Restore. And I think that's where this will go. I think he's going to end up just drinking all their milkshakes.
And we want professionalism as well. I mean, marching up and down, I'm sorry, but it hasn't achieved a damn thing. All of these Tommy Robinson marches, it's been going on for 10, 15 years. And the establishment has just rolled on regardless. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter. What you need to do is have people who can write a good letter, who can organize a team, who can get something done. It's exactly the types that we see in Restore Britain right now. And the protesting, well, I don't know, maybe I'm sure there's some place for it, but if that's what Nick Tenconia is offering, then no.
I mean, again, we all know what Farage is, but does Farage lead protests? No, he didn't lead protests to get even where he is. Like, name a single political leader who managed it through that, even when he was running UKIP himself, Farage. I don't think they were leading protests through against thing of the day, up in another town.
Yeah, exactly. Someone's in the chat saying that I'm using Sargon's line about writing a letter. I vaguely remember him saying something about that, but I'm not saying that you gain power by writing a letter, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm using that as an example of professionalism. That's all. The ability to do that, the ability to communicate effectively, concisely, all of that stuff that you see in Restore Britain right now. So that's what I meant.
I'll be curious to see what the uptick is when they have essentially a good pipeline to local branches, basically. Because there's two approaches. Like I've seen two takes on this really, which is the first is, we just want people who are already competent, right? If you want to start a local branch, start a local branch. But then it's about getting recognition, right, backing and consistent posters and leaflets and things from the bigger party. And the other thing is making it easy for people to engage if they want to engage. Because I think Harrison said that he had received 6,500 emails in the last 24 hours of people who were just desperate to help out, and he was still trying to figure his way through that. From my own experience running an international, or running the Basket Weavers, or for the brief period that I was running a lot of that, from an organizational standpoint of getting chapters up and running, I mean, rather than the technical stuff and all the good work that Beowulf does. It's really curious. Like, I put together the London Basket Weavers myself, like through grit and determination, basically, and then used that as a blueprint. But once that blueprint was established, I was able to put together a couple of documents to send to people to help them form their own Basket Weavers chapter. For those who don't know, Basket Weavers is a like a social group essentially for disaffected right-wingers, essentially, to find their local communities and meet up, and was quite a successful project and still is. You can join at basketweavers.net. But I think we'll see, when we see one local, or a dozen local branches spring up sort of through emergent leadership, they then get endorsed, then they can produce the paperwork basically to get the ball rolling on that, and then it's much easier as well for people to defect, because this brings us kind of nicely onto the the defection thing, which is
Just before we get on to that,
sure.
could I say one thing? Because somebody
Absolutely.
mentioned Ricky Doolan, and this reminds me of this whole idea of merging organizations that already exist into Restore Britain. I think you should be very careful about doing that kind of thing, because you're bringing in all the habits and conventions and people of that organization into your new one, and they come preloaded with coordination with each other, so they can then operate against you. So and then they have the expectations of that previous organization, the expectations of behavior, the expectations of the goals, etc. So it's better. I can see why Rupert Lowe just wants a completely fresh start. And if individuals from these old organizations want to join, then they can, but they know they're joining without that previous social capital, if you like, and they're joining something that has its own ways of operating. That's a far better situation. Usually you can't do that because you don't have the wherewithal you can't afford to do that. You can't afford to be that demanding. But I think Restore Britain can afford that. So I think they should set that high standard.
It is one thing which I've seen, because I've seen that it mentioned quite a lot that I've completely lost my train of thought there. Nick, I can see you want to speak. Go on.
No, I'm just going to reply, give my 2 cents on the last topic. I know I'm the normie here, and people are thinking, "What's this GB News boomer doing here?" But I'll give my 2 cents. I've left GB. I'll give my 2 cents, which is because I'm vaguely connected to some of these things. UKIP, I knew that they were sort of dead when Neil Hamilton said to me, "Do you want to be the deputy leader?" And I thought he was joking, but then I looked at some of the people they were hiring. I was like, I don't think he was actually joking. And then Ben wanted me to be in advance. And I do like Ben. I'm not saying this in any kind of gossipy way, just simply that I didn't think it was worth doing unless Rupert was going to be involved. And I was told that he was going to be, but it seemed to me that he wasn't going to be. And now I think that was never really the case. I think that was more just Ben's hope. And so the advanced people, Ben's been like publicly tweeting about it now, and it's getting a bit weird. And Rupert on Dan's show said there's risks involved in just doing that, which is kind of what Morgoth was alluding to. So the advanced people are actually going to be annoyed as the thing if they're a bit selfish about it, because I could have joined advanced and then tried to strong arm some position at Restore, but I was just like, no, there's no point being involved unless it's Rupert, and it doesn't matter if I'm involved or not. It's about the Rupert party, whatever that is, which turned out to be Restore. And so they've just got to, as you say, just stand down. Basically, it's going to be a very selfless move from Ben, but he's going to have to just do that, but also not just Ben, but all the advanced people are going to have to just stand down and move to Restore, I'm afraid. And some of them don't like it. We saw that bloke lashing out at Carl the other day. And I do like them. Nick Buckley is standing in Gorton for Advance. He's just been on my podcast. They're good people, but they're just going to have to stand down from those parties. And just and there's that cartoonishness, which people have sort of mentioned. They didn't use that term, but yeah, there's certain people you don't really want to bring on board because they just bring noise and problems. And as for marches, marches can do something. I think I agreed with Carl that they did scare Starmer. He did seem to be a little bit worried by that massive Tommy march. Then, of course, that could go the other way, and it just means people get put in prison or crackdowns online or something. But it could also just scare the regime a little bit that, this number of people are dissatisfied on the streets, and maybe they might have to do something about immigration. But in general, they're not a route to actual political power, as people have said.
Yeah, but one thing I would say about Ben Habib is I think he means well. I don't think he's a bad guy, but I think it's a shame that Rupert Lowe didn't talk to him about this beforehand, before making the public announcement, because now it seems to be playing out in public, and it's not great. It's not a good look for either of them, and I really hope that it doesn't descend into what happened with Ben Habib and Nigel Farage, where Ben Habib was frequently going on live streams and just moaning, ranting about Nigel Farage. I really hope he doesn't do that, but regarding Rupert Lowe, actually for his own sake. I don't think that it would damage Rupert Lowe very much, but I think it would make him look just bad. But the other thing is Tommy Robinson, who apparently, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've read that he was involved with Advance, and he's got his crowd are in there, and now they're talking about what they want to do with Restore Britain. For God's sake, keep those people on a short leash. That's all I would say about that.
Yeah, I would actually go further and just the Tommy Robinson. I would probably just not allowed to join. I just think that's a disaster, absolute disaster waiting to happen. And it's almost like I'll tell you what will happen if he joins, even if he's not given, he's not appearing in public, or there'll be pressure placed on Rupert to go to like a Tommy rally or whatever, and I think that's absolutely the wrong direction. And what will happen is that like all of the media, it's as if Tommy Robinson's been created not just to be a shill for Zion, but also to be like a kind of to hand a cudgel to the mainstream media. So all of a sudden, like it'll be Rupert will just and the lads and Charlie and them, they'll all have to constantly answer for Tommy Robinson and all of the stuff he said in the past, and he's a far right figure and all the rest of it. And I just think, is it worth it? Is it really worth it? I think I don't even think like he's had his day. I think the whole sort of the Israel thing, I think that's busted flush. I think that's done with on a grassroots level. I don't think people the whole counter jihad thing, I think, is done. It's one thing to say, as Rupert has, we're not going to tolerate radical Islam spreading in the country. It's the grooming gangs, right? Okay, but then if you make that this kind of Gates of Vienna, like kind of ideological stance, which came around in the sort of 2000s, just conveniently enough, alongside the war on terror. And it always feeds back into Israel. It feeds into the American deep state. It's just absolutely cancerous and will ruin anything. And I just don't think it's worth the hassle. I think it can just be easily avoided, even if you just say at the end of the day, where we are just like a little Englander party. We're not interested in those issues. We're just looking out for Britain and British people. That's it. We hardly even have a foreign policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's like,
the other thing is you'd have to constantly deal with the drama that Tommy seems to generate constantly. So I agree with you. I think that you should keep him out, frankly.
Tommy's an interesting one as well, because I'm thinking back to the Epping migrant hotel protests, where that was a very local driven thing, and he had initially said that he was going to come in and lead a big rally down there, right? And he went back on that and said, actually, I'm not going because I know that it will just become all about me, right? The entire process will be completely delegitimized. Now, regardless of what we think of protest, and regardless of what we think of that particular protest and what happened with it, it just sort of revealed the lengths the government's willing to go to bypass the public will. His thoughts process on that was, I think, interesting, and I don't think he would actually attach himself. I mean, I don't think it would be even necessary to gatekeep him probably out of Restore, personally, because I think he knows the baggage that he comes from. So if he genuinely feels like he supports what Restore's doing, then he won't attach himself because of that. It's more a question of, does he encourage his supporters to go there, or is there naturally going to be an overlap anyway, where they will come on board and they will advocate essentially on his behalf? And I think the benefit that Restore has is, again, they're looking for, without being too rude, qualified and competent people, right? And the vast majority of Robinson's base are kind of a bit of the underclass of Britain, right? Like it's a lot of people who have nothing better to do than go to the United Kingdom rally and have a sing and a dance about and get angry and a bit pissed. So as much as I think he's drawn attention to the grooming gangs thing and so on, I don't think that I think Restore is basically quite well armored against the Robinsons crowd, so to speak, just because of what they're asking for. Yeah, like because they're asking for strong business leaders and not tradesmen, you know.
Yeah.
As for kissing the wall and stuff like that, I think I quite like the idea of just keep it simple, stupid. As long as
Keep
you
it
can
local.
keep it local, keep it focused on Britain and her issues. Sorry, we've got no time for that wall nonsense. We've got problems here that we've got to solve, right? Like keep it hyper focused and keep it sort of in the right direction, and foreign policy can come in like 4 years time or whatever, and at that point he can do whatever he wants in terms of if he's got the power. So that's a different discussion, I guess. Kiss Hadrian's wall instead. Yeah, I like that from the chat. Right, I will just briefly come on to, because we sort of covered it, these are some of the defectors from Reform. There are, last count, there were 14 councillors who've come across and defected. I thought it was really interesting what Morgoth said about the organised minority within your own ranks. So it's and people quite famously talk about the hostile environment within Reform to its local councillors and their aides. But then you have to wonder about who's willing to put up with that and thrive in that environment. They're either going to be deeply committed to Reform, or they're going to be people with a really thick skin, and that can go one of two ways, I think, if they do defect. Now, in terms of the impact these defections are having on Reform, not that huge. There are again, according to Google that I've got up, it's they have 963 councillors as of mid-January in Reform, so about 1,000. So 14 is really a drop in the bucket, really. But I'm just curious what people think of, given what we've just been talking about, taking on too much or not enough talent, so to speak, from Reform's existing base.
Shall I go?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't. I think it's just good news. I don't really see what's complicated. I think. I mean, councillors are just normal people, aren't they? And what you're seeing is people who are just fed up. People who have kind of. Let's not forget, I mean, we've discussed it quite a bit, but from their perspective, they've probably sort of been royally pissed off at signing on for Reform, becoming a councillor, putting the work in, and then seeing that because they were stabbed in the back by the Tories, only to have the Tories pop up like mushrooms at the upper tier strata of the party. And so I mean, can you imagine what the morale must be like in Reform when the whole point of the party was to do the opposite of what they're doing, in the same way as the Conservatives themselves were elected to get Brexit done and get immigration down, and they just opened the floodgates. It's just betrayal after betrayal after betrayal of the normal people in this country. And this is why you end up like a battered housewife when another sort of organization, another party arrives on the scene, and everybody's kind of like, are we gonna sort of, I mentioned this in the blog about it that I wrote last week, where it's like, are we all just waiting for the rug pull? Now, in the case of Restore, we're a lot closer to it. I mean, he's literally good, sitting in the Lotus Eaters studio talking to Sargon. So it is different. I've never seen anything like this. I've never been as close to in terms of degrees of separation and all of that than Restore. And so I can see why it's attractive to people. I can see why all of these councillors are just jumping ship, because they've just been shot on by Farage and the Tories all over again.
Yeah, and I think at the local level as well, I've heard so many stories of mistreatment by reform, hierarchy. And one young man, nice guy, worked with Zia Yusuf, used a very brutal 4-letter word about him. I think that people have been treated terribly. I've had a lot of subscribers on my Substack who were reform counselors or involved at that kind of level. I'm saying they've left. It's just this appalling treatment and bad organization. So I've heard a lot of that. Some of it could be put down to being a new party, but I think some of it is just pure nastiness and bad people. There's a funny rumor today about Sarah Poachin joining Restore. I've got no idea about the veracity of it, but that would be, it's not inconceivable because she said some fairly base stuff and because she's obviously been shafted somewhat by the Farage announcements. I say somewhat because she couldn't necessarily expect to be one of the first shadow cabinet, as they call it, announcements. So she's been somewhat shafted, but Lee Anderson's one that's been most shafted. It'd be hilarious if he tried to come over because he's been in Labour, Tories and Reform. But obviously the behaviour around Rupert's dog would probably make that impossible. But yeah, I mean, defections are fine as long as it's not Tories associated with the 14 years, right? Which is the problem that Reform have run straight into, particularly Nadeem Zahawi, who today is calling the appointment of Antonia Romeo for cabinet secretary. He's calling her a good appointment. Meanwhile, Zia Yusuf is saying it's awful, and Tice is retweeting Stephen Edgerton saying it's awful. So when you've got people like Zahawi, it's sort of all over. But yeah, taking these people from Reform or even Tories at local level seems fine to me. And it would be funny if someone like Poachin came across. Although whether it'd be good or not, I don't know. But it'd be funny. I'm not necessarily saying it's a good idea.
All right. I think that sort of brings us to the end of our agenda topics. Is there anything that you think we haven't covered or that you're champing at the bit to mention about Restore, concerns or queries or anything you're thinking about?
Something that I've noticed is that the reaction from the sort of the shit lib left, like the actual over on the left, because they've got their own stuff going on with Starman, the Green Party, and all of that. That I think like, from their perspective, from their perspective, it must seem like the right wing is just a total dog's breakfast, and there's all of these crazy batshit parties popping up. I mean, even Farage said in a speech the other day, he thinks there's like 12 parties on the right. And at the end of the day, it's not really their concern. It's the concern of Reform. They are the watchers on the wall, if you like. They are the ones involved with the containment. And I think the harder Reform kind of batters against the wall, the more Reform are going to sort of scream back down, there's too many, like some Roman legion, like we need backup, we need assistance here because we're struggling to contain them. I think that's where this is going to go. And by that point, it will be just obvious that Reform is just part of the establishment. One video that I did watch, I was out walking my dog. I didn't watch it. I just saw this shit lib called Richard Murphy. And he did this. It had like 33,000 views, and I just found it sickening because he was appealing to all. Like what he'd done, had read the immigration paper, Restore's immigration paper, and he was getting into all of this sort of how we're going to have to defend our rights, and this is the rise of fascism, and he believes in care and tolerance and all of this. And I was thinking, do you know what I read last week? Those infographics on the rape gang inquiry. Like, do you know like the scars that people like who actually give a shit have in their psychology because of what's been done, because of your values? I just wish these. I would just love to sit down with them and say, this is what you wrote. This, your way of thinking, has wrought horrors upon the girls of this country which have never been seen. You could say maybe 500 years. You could say maybe 1,000. It's unprecedented, the scale of it.
And they don't even comprehend that scale either. Like I had someone the other day going, "Oh, it's like it's 50,000 or something, isn't it?" And I was like, "No, it's 7 times higher than that at the most conservative estimate." It's 350,000 women, girls. At the most conservative, and people you can't imagine that many people in a room, like, so to speak.
I view these people as being like psychotic, that, because what he's doing is he's naming these values, human rights, for like that hasn't stopped people going to jail for tweets. It's all bullshit. It's all this huge edifice of lies and hypocrisy, and it has caused unbelievable damage. And this is actually what I like about what I hear in Restore, is that there's a recognition that this kind of quangocracy and all this sort of Blairite stuff, which you hear all of the time, Blairite, all of it is just heaped up, and it all needs just tearing down. And I really liked it when they're saying that one of the boys on the TV the other day was like, we're not here to reform, we're here to tear it all down. That it was like music to my ears. And then there was another one with this. He's just this. Have you seen a leftist called Tom Nichols? And he's got that kind of millennial wavy hair, and he wears these really thick glasses, and he's just got this excruciating, twitchy, giggling, cuntish behavior. Like it's just awful. And he was going through one of the sort of the promo videos that had been made, and which was going around. And he didn't get it again. Like there's a kind of context to all of this, and he was going through and suggesting that maybe Rupert Lowe gets sued by a movie studio because there was clips of Zulu in and clips of the Italian Job, and he was giggling away to himself. He's got a big audience, and I just and what just boils me piss is that there's a context to all of this. There's a context to why people are so thoroughly demoralized and depressed. Like, there's been horrors beyond your imagination have happened in this country, and you get these shit libs with the he's using the Zulu soundtrack, maybe we can get him on copyright. And then you've got this older boomer kind of prattling on about human rights when we've got people in jail for tweets and hundreds of thousands of destroyed English girls. And I just think I want it all just to end. I just want all of this bullshit torn to pieces.
And yeah, I think that the left are in for a massive shock because of this. The schools, the universities are inducting young lefties into a worldview that has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with what's actually going on, and it's oblivious to its own effects. So if 1 million girls get raped because of equality, that doesn't actually affect the people pushing equality. They'll just keep doing it. And they'll keep inducting the young into this ideology. But then the young have to deal with the real world eventually. And they resist it. You know, their only way of dealing with it is to reject and deny and insist that no, it's just that real progressivism hasn't been tried yet. We haven't done it. We haven't got the formula right yet, but we're just on the brink, perpetually on the brink of working out how to do multiculturalism successfully, how to have massive numbers of Pakistanis in your country without them raping your girls. And we'll get to this incredible recipe somehow, but it never happens, and it's never going to happen. And I think this is the shock that they're in for, that other people have already clocked that it's not working out, and it's never going to work out. So something radical has to happen. Something radically different has to happen. And the left are stuck on this way of thinking from the 90s, the 2000s, that was already obsolete in 2014 when the first Rotherham report came out. It was, I mean, that's why it had such a profound effect on me and my work at the time. And I think on a lot of people at the time who were awake to it, that it rubbished all of the stuff that we'd been told all our lives, all the stuff that we might have suspected was wrong. But here was the absolute cast iron proof that it was wrong. And So it's been obsolete for a long time, but they still hold on to it anyway. And what that is going to mean is that they become increasingly, in the 2020s, irrelevant and a laughing stock at best, or just despised and loathed. And I don't think there's a way back for them, because what can they do? They'd have to reject. They'd have to admit that they got it wrong, and they'd have to admit that they've been fighting against right for all their lives, and they'd have to admit that their enemies were correct all along. And that goes for not just the stupid spotty activist on you were just talking about, Tom Nicholas. It goes right up to the hosts of Have I Got News for You. It goes up to the academics, to all the politicians and the NGOs, the EU, everything. This whole edifice is built on a lie, and it propagates lies, and it survives by lies. But eventually the lies run out. Eventually reality comes knocking, and let's hope that that's what Restore Britain is.
Yeah, very well said. I'll just add my 2 cents while we're here. And there was a tweet the other day. Restore had put out a post of their new councillors, and a woman replied, 7 white people, you are sick. She was inevitably white. She describes herself as educated and enlightened on her bio. So just in terms of sort of the mania of that worldview. But the other really striking clip was Hannah Spencer, the Green candidate in Gorton and Denton. And she was on with Matt Goodwin, I'm sure you saw it. And he said, well, what about Manchester Arena bombing and these kind of things? Why is this happening? You're ignoring it. She goes, because of people like you dividing us. And it's like, that's their mentality. And Gareth Roberts put it quite well. He said, thinking about this again after the initial shock, what I think it reveals is that paradoxically, progressives don't think of minorities as people at all, good or bad or whatever, just as pawns in their status game with other white people, which is the only thing that matters to them. And I said something very similar to what Woes just said there, which was that it points to no external reality. They just know the things their group is supposed to say. But as you're saying there, that's not going to be enough anymore. I got a glimpse of it after the Jim Ratcliffe thing, because I normally watch these Man United fan channels. I watch the slop to relax sometimes, but and it's the only thing I can talk to my family about is football. But they're all just saying the same reflexive things. Oh, it's stupid that Jim Ratcliffe said colonial, we're being colonized because we had an empire, and it's like, okay, so we deserve to be colonized. They should take revenge. Is that your position? All these ill thought out positions that have just been repeating for years, now coming, it's hit the fan, and they're just no longer adequate, as you're saying there. And they have to own it. They have to own the thousands of rapes and the torture, because that is the direct result of their worldview. That's the direct result of being terrified about being called racist. And that's why it was disgusting that Matt Goodwin was getting on board that and calling Restore followers racist. It's like, no, that word has to be retired by the grooming gangs, because it was used to enable the rape and torture of thousands of children, essentially British girls.
I can't remember who it was who said it recently, but they said essentially that there's that scene in Tropic Thunder where Robert Downey Jr.'s character says that word has been used to hold us down, and he's talking about the N word, right? And it's like the R word has been used to hold the British people down. Now, that's not me who's coined that, but I can't remember who did it at the moment, and that does definitely need to be retired. I do think that there's an interesting dynamic with the Zoomers coming up, although there's been a bit of conflicting messaging on the idea of the based sprogs, the based Zoomers or whatever, when polling shows that they'd overwhelmingly vote Green. Although I think that's mostly weighted towards women. And we also know that younger people are much less likely to vote anyway. So there's this idea, I think there's people talk about, oh, well, the Zoomers are coming up and the Boomers are dying off. And so the arguments that worked for the Boomers are not working for the younger generations. But there is a risk, I think, that the younger generations will be co-opted by that different messaging. There was a line Carl said in the interview, which is the difference between every single party for the past 30 years has fought for freedom and for equality and freedom, or something like that, and as opposed to fairness and I think fairness and something else, basically, where you can use terms which are not loaded with all of this stuff which has been co-opted by leftist institutions and research papers and the idea of equity communism, basically. It's I think as long as Restore can get the framing right, then you're opening people's minds up to an entirely new way, or an old way, if you want to think about it more traditionally, of thinking about the nation and politics within it, because that's also part of the trap with reform, is they're still working in the equality and the equality frame, basically. Even when they're talking about DEI, they're talking about, oh, DEI has actually been inequality in disguise, so we must get back to equality, and so on. So I'm curious, as I say, where the messaging goes, and I'm quite optimistic for Restore's kind of press pieces when they start coming out properly, you know, like the official press packs and stuff like that. Right. Does anyone else want to say anything else before I move on to the super chats? We've been here for just over 2 hours now, but open to more discussion if you're about.
No, I mean, I was going to say something about the Zoomers, but it's maybe for a whole other show or something like that. But I think I think there is a thing. I think that they are. I know, like, based is out of fashion now, but it's to do with social media and growing up. So all of us here were mainly watching the same TV shows and whatnot. Well, you know, I think I'm the oldest here, but there was I mean, I'm not saying anything new here, but if you grew up in the 80s and in the 90s and probably the early 2000s, everybody tended to watch the same sort of TV shows. You all had the same cultural references. But then when you get to social media age, everybody silos off into their own little sort of zones.
Fandoms, I believe they call them.
And I think this is reflective. So the young men, the Zoomers, are like, it's unbelievable how like well read they are on these subjects, because that's been their niche. That's where they've been in the social media market. And it'll probably be the case for sort of leftists as well, though they do tend to be girls, which is a bit like a bigger problem at this stage. Girls and predatory kind of boys as well, who are just in it for the girls. But it's interesting how it surprises me that somebody can be 21 years old, like Charlie Downs or something, and they're so well acquainted with stuff which I wasn't even into until I was like in my late 30s or 40s. It's really like, that's new. I don't think we had that in the past at all.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, that is very impressive. It's like learning guitar. I had to do it from books, that just like, you know, actual books, and they were always talking about the like Van Halen era of rock, even though that had kind of ended. Whereas everyone now is a virtuoso on YouTube because they've got YouTube. So this generation, they've been able to just get access to so much more, and it does make them very impressive.
All right, I'm going to bring us on to the super chats then, and then we can get out of here. So I have $5 from Hagnar the Viking. Thank you, sir. Who says, please thank Millennial Woes for his amazing tweet about leftist discourse being impossible because they pretend to be foolish. That's for you, Millennial Woes.
Thank you. It was just an accident. I mean, I wrote it off the cuff, and it's made this huge splash that I didn't expect.
Like so many classics. That's how Pretty Woman was written. Took 5 minutes, apparently. Yesterday was a dream. So it's like one of those classics that just came out.
There was
right.
I grew up in a very churchy household, still am, and there was a guy who had written a song that made all of his royalties, and he was like, "Yeah, that was the one song I put the least thought into. It took 15 minutes, you know, and it just sort of came to me and wrote it down, and that's made me the most money." So, and it's amazing. I think I made an offhand. My best performing tweet of all time was something like someone was talking about how ethnicity didn't exist, and I just put up a picture of a Japanese man and PewDiePie and said, which one's Japanese? And it was like the biggest tweet I'd ever had. like 1.5 million hits or something, and I was like, okay, just the effort level does not correspond. But yeah, there we go. Coney, current year for £5, thank you, sir, says, if this party is to have any hope, it has to have a no-tolerance approach to Zionism and Zionist infiltration and reject the legacy of Thatcherism. Thank you, Coney. Don't think there's
Can I
much
say
we can
one
say
very, very quick thing, because I forgot to say it earlier when we said, whether Rupert's a Thatcherite or not. Thatcher wasn't just a Thatcherite. I just want to make that point, because as Roger Scruton has pointed out, she was a patriot, grocer's daughter, etc. She was sort of the heart of England. Although, yes, then, of course, the Hayek and the Milton Friedman came in and she was taught that by other people. But Thatcher herself wasn't all Thatcherite. Just wanted to add that.
Okay. $11 cheese for $10 says, I'm skeptical because much like being pregnant, you can't be a little bit Zio. You can't just pay them lip service. They demand results. Is Restore genuine or another manufactured release valve? So that I will say, Rupert certainly to me seems genuine and like someone who essentially can't be bought. But we've already discussed on stream like the pressures of big money and the what's needed to operate the machinery of a national political party. But does anyone else have any thoughts on this?
Well, you'll see people have been sort of in my replies with screenshots all week where in the past and not too long ago, you can see that Lowe's sentiments were clearly pro-Israel rather than being neutral. And then there was that thing that happened where about Jews being unsafe because of Muslims and this kind of thing. So there's no getting around the fact that that's clearly what his sort of views on it were. Now, the question then is, how much was that just like a sort of default Tory setting, and how much was it like, is he actually all in on that? And then, is that going to be a factor going forward in Restore? Because there's no, like, that is just the case. Historically, that is the case. There's no point in pretending that wasn't the case. So I don't know. As it stands now, as far as I know, there's no sort of influence by them whatsoever on Restore, other than what his kind of default settings are as a Tory. So we'll just have to see and talk behind the scenes and try and sort of raise objections in a sensible and respectful manner if this becomes an issue.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I get the feeling that was a default thing he said at the time. I doubt that he knew much about the issue, the broader issue. At the time, I think most people don't, and so I suspect that he just said what he thought was the reasonable thing to say at the time. The fact that he hasn't said many other things in support of that kind of stuff indicates this to me. It indicates that this is not going to be a huge issue. But we are just going to have to wait and see.
Well, he's actually said less. And it's not like he's out there tweeting his support for like Trump's upcoming war with Iran or whatever other mayhem's about to unleash in the Middle East. It's squarely on Britain, which is fine. That's fine.
And was it the reform line, or are you talking about post-reform?
Well, I would just assume it was why during and then after he was in reform. But
yeah, right. Because the during one could have just been the party line. That's my only point.
I would assume if you are a lifelong Tory, your sort of factory settings are to be pro-Israel and pro that group. Now, I think that we're just going to have to accept that was the case. But then when you begin to make other considerations about the influences and about the way things go in political terms and how that would, where you could say the online right is and what the sentiment is going across the country and how it's not 2005 anymore and all the rest of it, it could be where it's like, well, this just isn't sensible anymore. Now, the problem here is that the money men probably just haven't arrived yet. And this is, it is what it is. We know what it is. We know what this group are like, and we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I agree on the basic point that there's a difference between Israel has a right to defend itself, standard Tory line, versus this kind of obsession where it becomes people like everything to people on the centre right, and they put it ahead of everything, which is a different kettle of fish. But yeah, I agree.
Even to be honest, even Farage isn't that much of a kind of Zionist as what you may think. Even he doesn't really go all that much on board with them. Not nearly as much as somebody like Tommy Robinson or the entire kind of American scene, which is just crazy, which is just unhinged. But you saw that Reform had that Reform Jewish Alliance last week, which remember, this is what they were doing last week, and this week they're saying that identity politics and tribalism is evil. And it's, I mean, we didn't even touch on that, but you've got all of these people like that Barrett fella and all these people, the hypocrisy. It's as if they've never had to consider their own hypocrisy before.
Yeah, and Inman is I've forgotten his first name. I think it's Richard. It's crazy. There was a mad clip of him where he was moaning about ethno-nationalists, and then he said, "Well, I support Israel. I don't know why they're not pro-Israel, because Israel's an ethno-nationalist state, and I'm really for Israel." Well, then why are you against the same thing for your own country? I mean, it's incredible.
It is funny. I think for a few people, the kind of Julia Hartley-Brewer type of people, that kind of, because those are the other people who are just hardcore about it. Even friends of mine like Alison Pearson, people are like strange about it. Or Toby Young, I used to do a podcast with, but they are extremely strange about it. And it's almost like the acceptable thing they can say, because they can't say, "Hey, what about British people?" Because that's kind of, until very recently, that's kind of like, banned. But they can just get really behind Israel as a kind of proxy for that. I mean, that's one reason, that's one guess. But yeah, they take it to a bizarre level, certain people, especially when, they hate so-called ethno-nationalism for anyone else. Bizarre.
Yeah. I'm going to move on now, but before we get too sidetracked into that particular discussion, maybe that's another roundtable. But the Johannes Jonesy says, "Brilliant panel. This truly feels like the beginning of something positive." Yeah, I think that's the general sense, is that there's a lot of positive energy and optimism right now. Thank you so much. Sensible Center says, "Please give this channel a subscribe. Nearly at 10,000. Yeah, I did accrue nearly 10,000 when I was running my long-running podcast series, which you can still find if you're interested in that on this channel. We've also run 3 other roundtables so far, one on remigration, one on the UK murder rate, and another one on the limits of power, with various interesting guests. And I will come in to another guy who said, "Will you be making these roundtables regularly? I miss having a weekly thing to look forward to of an evening since the demise of UO and Fake Accents," which was my podcast, and Unpopular Opinions being AA's. Yes, I intend to do more roundtables. They should be relatively regular, depending on guest availability, but I'm not going to set it to a specific day of the week, just because I tend to do them as interesting things come up. So hopefully, because I don't want it to become just another we're reacting to the slopification of the news kind of show. I want it to be a specific reason that I'm running a stream. But if you like these kind of directed streams, or we read a really interesting think piece, Morgoth's put some really good stuff out recently. Woes has put out some really good stuff recently. Nick's had some really interesting guests on recently. So it's like there's going to be stuff to talk about that's beyond the slop, if you will. Not that I'm renaming this to Beyond the Slop. So thank you very much for that, Sensible Center. Piotr 1986 says, "The genuine right always hits the ceiling in the UK before law, media, NGOs and MI5 move into sabotage. Why would this time be any different?" Does anyone have any thoughts?
Well, in the case of Reform, it looks like it was, I mean, it's just the personality of Nigel Farage. He isn't sincere. So I think that was always destined. and I did invest some hope in it at the start, but I'll forgive myself that. I think it was always destined to go in this direction. The other ones are the mainstream parties, which the less said the better. And then apart from that, you've got small parties, grassroots things. Their problem is lack of funding and lack of professionalism. So Restore Britain seems to escape all of those pitfalls. And that's why it's unique. That's why I've got hope for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just have a defiant fighting spirit. I'm definitely not an optimist like Carl. I'm not quite as pessimistic as Pete North, but I'm sort of far more towards that as a person. I'm incredibly pessimistic. But for some reason, I just have this But then the danger is you're a fool and fell for it again. But there's just that spirit where you're like, oh, we've got to save the country. And so, I can't be doing with blackpilling, even though the situation is incredibly blackpilling. I just can't bear, especially if you're not at least putting out work and making an effort. Those people that just reply, it's over. I always hate those people and tend to mute them or whatever, because it's just like, imagine having that guy next to you in the trenches, completely useless and demoralizing and immoral, actually. So I just think you have to take an attitude of, come on, let's fight and let's save the country, because there is no other valid attitude. There's no other moral attitude to me. If we're in a fight, in a war, I think that's the best analogy. You're going to hate me if I say, well, we've no chance of winning this one, lads. Let's pack it up. It's just, I just can't be like that, even if I'm in danger of being a dupe.
I think I'm waiting to see how. First of all, Rupert can't be bought. He has funding in order to sort of defend himself. He's got a very aggressive, sort of seeming counter strategy where he's already established, right? He's not like he's new in the sense of he's only been in politics for a while, but he's not a newcomer to taking hardline stances and so on. So being a business owner and having to manage that side of things. So, and a farmer, I'm sure comes with that. So I think as long as he's attracting the right talent, then he's going to be in a much better position to defend against the law, certainly, and NGOs. As for the media, they seem to be handling that quite well, and I can't speak for MI5, really. I can't speak for Glowies.
I mean, I would just say, answering the question, the answer is just that the right doesn't have patronage. In fact, it has quite the opposite. The MI5 and the will actually play dirty tricks on you pretty quick, by the way. But beyond that, there's no patronage. There's no billionaire giving you money. So the organization that have popped up have just been like normal people doing what they can. And you got to say fair play to them. Unfortunately, they don't last long. They don't have a team of qualified lawyers ready to defend them the way that Restore or Rupert could call on already. He already threatened somebody on Twitter the other day. Basically, our lawyers will be in touch. So if you've got 5 fellas and a dog from down the pub, they don't have that. And so they just can't withstand it when the system begins to lash out at them, or they hit the slightest bump in the road.
I'm also curious because Musk has also endorsed Rupert quite a lot, whether or not he might slide money that way for legal defenses and stuff, as he's highlighted, especially around the issues of free speech, that he'll pay people's defenses and things. I don't know if he's actually paid for any, but I think it's plausible that he has access to more resources than we think to defend himself.
Well,
Phoenix.
let's hope that Musk does, or someone else, if not Musk. Let's hope that money does materialize.
Yeah. Phoenix Reborn 6065 says, I like Rupert a lot and Restore Britain. I became a member, but I wonder how nativist minded he is compared to the other guys in Restore Britain. Is there a disconnect? We did just cover this in the podcast or the Roundtable, where we talked about how maybe he's aware or maybe he's not about how radical his supporters are compared to, say, himself. But I suppose it will remain to be seen in the policy documentation and so on, because I know he's not handling that directly either. His sort of head of policy direction is it's Lewis, I think. Can't remember entirely off the top of my head. Sorry if that's wrong, but I know it's one of his team, and I'm sure they're all in talks together. So we'll have to see, I suppose, is my answer to that. Anyone else?
I think he's
I think that
implicitly.
sorry,
No, go on.
go on.
I think he's implicitly pro-white in a way where he has this. We were talking about these sort of default opinions, and I think in the 1980s it would just be seen as common sense that you had a kind of bias towards the native British. But the issue, and this has come up on the sort of the panels and the discussion, is that people are going to start and drill down on that. Where you can kind of say, well, let's just say that message he gave to young white men that they've been neglected. Now, a television presenter may say, well, why did you address, because it's a good sentiment, because they have been marginalized, they have been cut out from the system and the rest of it. But a television presenter may well say, well, why could you not just say to all young men who have been marginalized by the system? And then he's going to, if they keep drilling down, he's actually going to have to explain that. And this, I think this is where the attack is already coming in. That's what Alex Phillips was doing with Charlie, was to try and make him come out and explicitly hold the nativist ethno position there, knowing what consequences would come from that. And I think Lowe has that, but in a kind of sort of just in this received, that's just what it is. That's just common sense. But when you put it into a kind of intellectual frame or an ideological frame, people are going to, like, you can't like sort of hand wave it away forever. And I think they have to be clued up to this. I mean, I would say the distinctions you can draw is to say that, well, there are people here organically and there are people here as a result of bureaucratic procedures. And we are on the side of the people who are here organically and their well-being, because the other people can always go back or whatever. But there is a distinction there. There is a difference. If you don't want to dress it up in entirely ethnic and racial terms, you can say, well, there are people here organically. There are people here who are here only because of bureaucratic processes and the modern sort of demands of the political class, which is something different to people who have kind of just been on the land popping up like mushrooms forever.
Yeah.
So another way to say it is that, well, there are other groups that exist to further the interests of other ethnic groups. So if we do exist, if Restore Britain does exist to further the interests of the native British, so what? Why is that so bad? But another way to say it would be, we don't hate other groups. We're not against them, but clearly the native people of this country have been neglected and abused for decades. So we're just righting a wrong. It's not that we're ideologically in favor of them. It's a moral thing, because it is a moral thing. And what I just said is just categorically true. So I think they could go on that line rather than an explicit ethno-nationalist line.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when he talks about young white men, you could argue he's just using the classical liberal meritocracy frame in a defensive posture and saying, well, hang on, why are they so much worse than everyone else? They're behind in schools and so on, which is obviously valid, but it only goes so far. Suella Braverman's saying the same things. But I do think he goes further in a kind of instinctive or implied way, which way he talks about British people, putting British people first, millions must go, etc. He may not be explicit about it, but and I would agree that the term ethno-nationalism I don't like, because it's top down. It feels deductive rather than inductive. It feels like a 20th century, written out formulation. Whereas if you just say, hang on, we're an eccentric island people, why shouldn't we survive on our own island? Which no one could possibly deny apply to any other people, like North Sentinel Island. You're not even allowed to leave a can of Coke, I like to point out. So why shouldn't we survive? Then you have to force the other side to say, well, it's just hatred, that they want to get rid of us purely out of hate and insane impulses. So I prefer that. But I think Rupert is more along those lines. He might not put it exactly as I put it there, but he's instinctively more along those lines, I think, even though he would never frame it rightly in terms of ethno-nationalism. And I'd agree. I think he'd just frame it in terms of common sense.
I mean, just to say quickly, a term that I've liked, I've started seeing pop up and around. Carl Benjamin says he coined it. I don't know. I didn't. But it's the term demographic security. And I find that such a benign, it's like, it isn't a scare the horses way to put it. And it immediately raises a few kind of, there's a certain set of premises baked into that, which I think's good. And you can't be called an extremist because it immediately puts you in the position of being the one that's concerned about the future, if you like. Like, how can it be a bad thing for the white British people as they stand on the census to have demographic security? I mean, even the numbers are baked into that. And I think that this kind of clever use of language is, and look, to be fair, I think they're already doing a great job. It's just some thoughts on where things are going. I mean, at the moment, I think they've been doing great stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good term. Yeah, it's like, why shouldn't we have our home, rather than the aggression of like the other terms mentioned, a sort of aggressive or expansionist or something. Whereas this is just like, yeah, democratic security. It's our home. Why shouldn't we secure it?
All right. Utvara01 says, can you talk about teal subversion and AI danger? I know almost nothing about teal, frankly. And I'm not entirely sure what the AI danger you're referring to is. I feel like this would probably be a bit of a rabbit hole. So unless anyone has anything concise to say on it,
I'll hit it quickly. I think, well, basically he's talking about Palantir, which is already in our institutions. And Farage was at the World Economic Forum, and as far as I understood it, he met kind of management from Palantir. And which is, I mean, I actually don't know what Reform's stance is on things like digital ID and the surveillance state. I mean, I can and have talked about that forever with Woes as well. But basically, the technology that's been rolled out on the Palestinians is coming for all of us. And the Teal and Palantir are basically at the heart of it, and Farage seems to be quite chummy with them. I'll just put that there. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, it is a danger. It is all a danger, and I think it's a horrifying situation.
Mm-hmm. And then we've just had one come in from Piotr 1986, who says, contention being electoral politics are a rigged game, and so it seems change from this vector seems fruitless, even wasteful. Call that a black pill, but the system is inhumane. Good panel, by the way. I mean, it remains to be seen. It's been rigged for a long time in favor of the Uniparty, but I think we're seeing a lot of breakages there, and you know, from everything from 0 seats at the last campaign, a complete collapse of mandates through political support, you know, complete collapse in voter turnout, and now we have 3 outsider parties essentially. That one which is reformed into the blob, so to speak, literally, and 2 being Restore Now and the Greens on the left, who are animating the left much more than Labour are, from what I can see. And people are looking for alternatives. So I don't know whether or not it can be rigged anymore, or how much it can be. I can see them trying to rig it again through reform, but we'll see. That's what I'll say.
Can I just reply on that? It's slightly less blackpilling when you think of it as a longer term process. I mean, electoral politics, I see what you mean, because we're in this period of turmoil where the system has completely failed. It can't do anything. It can't achieve anything. It can't represent the people. Dominic Cummings talks about it in terms of it being similar to 1840 to 1870s. That's already 3 decades for you. And anyone here will no doubt know all about Spengler and all these people claiming we're in, you know, long periods of decline for hundreds of years, Carlyle and these people. So what we keep hearing from Reform and all their supporters who parrot these propaganda lines is it's the last chance. This election is the last chance, A, and we must vote reform, B. So I actually reject both of those because it's not the last chance. Though someone, I think it was Basil the Great, pointed out to me, if we hit this demographic tipping point in terms of demographic security, then yes, that is a problem. But this idea it's the last chance. So what I am trying to answer the question, which is, if you see it as a longer term process of trying to get the system to function again, for example, electoral politics, then it's less blackpilling. But yeah, in the short term, it definitely the political system is obviously not working, and that's kind of the whole debate. Unless the person just means that democracy can never work, which is a different question.
Anyone have anything to say on this, or are we bringing things to a close?
I would just say we're going to find out how good the system is at dealing with an outside force, because I think that's what Restore Britain is, and so far that hasn't actually happened. I guess the last time would have been in the late 70s with the National Front, and I'm not equating that with Restore Britain. I'm just saying I think that was probably the last time there was such a tangible force from outside the mainstream. So we're going to find out that the electoral system, the political system, and also MI5, we're going to find out how resourceful they are, because I think they're going to have to bring out every tool they've got now. And on the one hand, that's dramatic, but on the other hand, it's well, I just hope that things go the way we want them to go.
I think the last time the system lost a grip would be Jeremy Corbyn and Labour, and you can see what happened.
Yeah,
you can see like what they deployed against him there. So this is why I can come across as a bit kind of somber and a bit kind of like sort of doomerish, but it's because I want this to work. I want it to do well. I want to win. I want to succeed, but you can't just kind of enjoy the vibe on Twitter and not be thinking about these things, because I remember on Corbyn, like 2019, it was just relentless attacks on Corbyn. And you look at the Middle East now and you can see why, because if he was in, and he would have pulled us out of all of that. And being totally against it, everything they were doing. So you can see, like, it's understandable why there were extremely powerful forces gunning for Jeremy Corbyn. And if this carries on, they're going to come for Rupert Lowe. This is the thing, if it goes well for us, they're going to go for Rupert Lowe. If it goes the other direction, then they won't. And this is the way I look at it. We're probably not even there yet. It's all too new. The contingency plans haven't been put in operation, and all of this kind of thing. But yeah, stay frosty out there, folks. It could get wild, or it could get boring. that's the thing.
That's the worst fear, even, in some way.
Yeah. It's the worst outcome is that things get boring again.
It kind of goes all the way back to what Woes said at the start, which is trust your enemies. They're rattled, and I think it was Restore Rupert's account posted the other day the brain bug from Starship Troopers. It's afraid. They are looking quite afraid, but let's see.
Right. On that note, I will bring this roundtable to a close. I'm sure there's more potentially we could have covered, but I think we've been pretty comprehensive. Just a reminder for anyone watching, here are the things which we had on the agenda. The stream will be retained. It's not going anywhere. It's not going behind a paywall, so you can watch it. I would encourage people, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, bring us up, share it around with your friends, drop it a like, and drop your thoughts. I'll endeavor to put chapters into it at some point this week. And yeah, until the next one, thank you so much to my guests. Despite issues with the Lecky, Morgoth's review, is there anything you'd like to shill?
Well, I've got there was a funny thing, because I did a sort of quick article last week on Saturday about my thoughts, which I've kind of reiterated here. I like the grim, dark Lowism approach of this is going to hurt, this is going to be painful, we're not here for a good time. Like, that speaks to my nature. But the funny thing is, the week before that, I did an article on this new Game of Thrones spin-off, which everybody's kind of praising. because it isn't this kind of nihilistic way. And I was kind of saying there's a vibe shift where people want like a new sincerity. They want the big sort of warm-hearted lad who gets knocked down and gets back up because it's the right thing to do and all of this. And I actually mentioned Rupert Lowe as amongst other people like Thomas Massey, these other people or how I now sort of got more respect for Cenk Uygur and Nigel Farage, that we're in this new the age of the new sincerity. And that all happened before Restore even launched. So yeah, you can check out me Substack articles on Morgoth's Review on Substack. They're all, I think them ones are just free to read.
Marvelous. And then we have Millennial Woes, famously banned from YouTube. But where else can people find you, sir?
Yeah. Well, I'm also on Substack, and I'm about to resume publishing one essay every Sunday morning, which is the pattern that I settled into. I've been there for about 3 years now, so that's about to resume after my post-millennial funk. And also, I'm doing a monthly live stream AMA on Twitter and Rumble and Odyssey, and that's where you can find me. Yeah, I think that's all I've got to say. Yeah.
Marvelous. And last of all, but not least, Nick Dixon, who vastly underestimates his audience appeal every time I speak to him. What are you up to?
I always feel I'm too much in the GB world, and people are like, "Oh, who's this normie?" But even though I'm not even on there anymore, it's just a weird neurosis. So, yeah, people should go to my YouTube. Lots of great guests, many of whom you'll know, of course, Carl and Academic Agent, but also people like David Starkey. I do my solo videos on there, streams, all sorts. NickDixon.net, Substack, if you really like my stuff, chuck in some money and help me survive. Or I'm on X at Nick Dixon, just my own name. Very good. Finally got my name. And Lotus Eaters on Fridays. I tend to do Lotus Eaters most Fridays and Lads Hour. So yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me.
Marvelous. You can find links to all of my guests in the description below. Don't forget to like the stream on your way out, and thank you so much for watching. You can find me on X at not__so_obvious under my name, Mark Houghton, and otherwise here. Thank you, everybody. Until the next one, good night.